Chapter 2297. When it came out, Ning Xuema saw its whole body clearly. Its body was streamlined, like a fire phoenix. When it spread its wings, it almost covered the entire space. The mouths of the 9 heads were all dripping with blood. It looked very bloody. When it left, Ning Xuema subconsciously looked at the celestial demon enchantment that was stuck on the totem pole. Luo Jiuchen was only left with a skeleton. There was no flesh on it. Obviously, he was eaten by the 9-headed bird. Ning Xuema looked at the skeleton in a daze. Luo Jiuchen died just like that? It seemed a little too simple. The celestial demon enchantment could trap souls. Even if a person died and only had a skeleton left, the soul should be attached to the skeleton. On the other side, Xinjiuli's flute played a few times. The 9-headed bird was obviously controlled by the flute. It wanted to fly down and peck Xinjiuli, but after the flute played, it went to chase the green-skinned zombies. Its 9 heads rose and fell like lightning, pecking the green-skinned zombies all over the ground. Everything was going according to plan. The 6 people from the underworld who were watching the battle outside the hall finally breathed a sigh of relief. They just had to wait for the 9-headed bird to peck the green-skinned zombies and then die of poison. However, Ning Xuema felt that things were going so smoothly that it was a bit strange. She opened her heaven's eye and looked at the skeleton. Then, she saw a few remnant souls wandering on the skeleton. Ning Xuema remembered that Luo Jiuchen once said that the souls of people who were eaten by this kind of guardian beast would be torn into pieces. If there was no special method, it would be difficult for them to gather and form again. The remnant souls were a little red. They were scattered here and there. Obviously, they had been torn into pieces and could not gather into a human shape. Only Luo Jiuchen was trapped in the celestial demon enchantment. The remnant souls on the skeleton naturally belonged to Luo Jiuchen. He was really torn into pieces by the guardian beast that he made himself. He could no longer do evil. Ning Xuema finally let out a sigh of relief. She felt much more relaxed now that she had gotten rid of this big problem. She had been standing by Xinjiuli's side the whole time, forming a defensive formation with him. At this moment, seeing that Xinjiuli had completely controlled the whole situation with his flute, she felt relieved. She watched the fierce battle between the 9-headed bird and the green-skinned zombie for a while, but she didn't notice anything unusual. Only then did he turn his gaze towards the fiend god barrier. The wisps of remnant souls within the barrier were drifting about. From time to time, they would be struck by the flickering talismans within the barrier and disappear with a creak. From the looks of it, it wouldn't take long for the soul inside to be completely devoured. At that time, Luo Jiuchen would truly vanish. She stared at it for a moment and felt that a wisp of remnant soul was not normal. It was shaped like a bird's wing. Although Luo Jiuchen was a demigod, his original body had always been a real human. How could he have wings? He was not an angel. The more Ning Xuema thought about it, the more she felt that something was amiss. She took a few steps towards the god-devil barrier, wanting to take a closer look. "Be careful!" Someone shouted out. Almost at the same time, Ning Xuema heard a sudden gust of wind above her head. She instinctively swung her sword above her head. With a loud clang, it was as if she had cut a piece of fine iron. Countless sparks flew everywhere. At the same time Ning Xuema brandished her sword, she abruptly rolled away. While she was rolling, she saw a sharp and bloody mouth with countless fangs close at hand. It was the ghost chariot's mouth. Chapter 2298. Ning Xuema's body stiffened, probably because she was too shocked. In that short moment, the ghost chariot's mouth was about to close on her body. In the next moment, Ning Xuema had already fallen into the ghost chariot's mouth. Several of the ghost chariot's fangs were embedded in her body, but it did not tear her apart. Instead, it held her in its mouth and flew up. "Let go of her." Xinjiuli's expression changed, and he suddenly flew up. His sword flashed with a bright white light, and he slashed at the bird's head that was holding Ning Xuema in its mouth. The 9-headed bird let out a long cry, flapped its wings, and suddenly flew up. With a crash, the entire hall's roof collapsed, and the 9-headed bird flew out in a cloud of dust. With a flash of white light, Xinjiuli chased after it and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The 6 people from the underworld were speechless. The 6 of them did not expect such a change to happen when they had the upper hand. The Devil Master was taken away by the 9-headed bird. At that moment, there were only 2 or 3 green-skinned zombies left in the hall. Without the control of the flute, these zombies regained their ferocity and rushed toward the 6 people in the tunnel. Kill them even if you have to die. Don't let any of them escape. General Lung finally came back to his senses and hurriedly ordered. Only when the zombies and the 9-headed bird were all killed could the array be completely broken. They could not do anything to the 9-headed bird, but they could still deal with the green-skinned zombies. Under the vast sky, in the clouds, the sound of the flute was as sharp as a knife, shuttling through the air. The 9-headed bird in front of them was originally fleeing as fast as lightning, but under the disturbance of the flute, it began to fly crookedly. Its 9 heads fiercely pulled in 9 different directions, as if all of them wanted to take the lead. Unfortunately, they couldn't compete with the head holding Ning Xuema in its mouth. Their main direction of flight was still forward. However, because the 9 heads were not in the same direction, its flying speed was naturally greatly reduced. In a moment, Shinjiuli caught up with it. Just as Shinjiuli was about to catch up to it, he flicked his fingers and set up 6 barriers around the 9-headed bird, sealing off all its escape routes. Luo Jiuchen, put her down, Shinjiuli said in a low voice. The 9-headed bird's body slightly stiffened. The bird head that was holding Ning Xuema in its mouth looked at Shinjiuli. Suddenly, it let out a muffled laugh. Shinjiuli, you can actually recognize me like this. Unknowingly, he had admitted his identity. Even the head of the bird flashed with purple light, and a human face appeared. That face belonged to Luo Jiuchen. Clearly, its soul was attached to one of the heads of the 9-headed bird. The 9-headed bird was originally controlled by 9 heads. Every time it flew, its body would spin like a windmill. Luo Jiuchen's soul was very strong. Once he controlled one of the heads, he naturally had the absolute control, so his flying speed was amazing. The speed of the 9-headed bird was famous in the 6 realms. Shinjiuli's martial arts had not fully recovered. If he chased after it with his strength, it would take a long time. In order to catch up with it as soon as possible, Shinjiuli used the flute to control the other 8 heads of the 9-headed bird. This slowed it down and finally caught it. The moment he intercepted the 9-headed bird, his gaze fell on the big mouth holding Ning Xuema in its mouth. Ning Xuema's body was stuck in the bird's mouth. A few of its sharp teeth were already embedded in her body. She was motionless, and he didn't know if she had fainted or if she had already died. Chapter 2299. If he tried to snatch her by force, her body would probably be torn apart. Luo Jiuchen, if you let go of her, I can let you live. Shinjiuli spoke again. The bird head laughed loudly. Shinjiuli, if you have the ability, then snatch her back from my mouth. Step back or I'll bite her in half. It bit down slightly, and its fangs pierced deeper into Ning Xuema's body. Her body trembled, and blood dripped from her body into the 9-headed bird's mouth. So fresh and beautiful. As expected of the blood of a Buddha and a demon, it's a great supplement for me. Shinjiuli, do you want her dead or alive? The 9-headed bird's eyes burned with a bloodthirsty passion. Don't hurt her. What do you want? Shinjiuli clenched his fists. If you want her to live, you have to die. The 9-headed bird's voice was cold. Shinjiuli's gaze fell on the bird's head. I say no? Then I can only swallow her. Letting her die in my stomach is not a bad idea. If anything happens to her, Luo Jiuchen, I'll turn you into ashes. Ha, it's not a bad idea to drag her down with me when I'm turned into ashes. Shinjiuli, I'll count to 3. If you don't make a decision, she'll become my food. In order to increase the intimidation effect, the bird's beak bit down again, causing more blood to flow out. Shinjiuli's knuckles turned pale, and he said in a low voice, How do I know you won't go back on your words? Shinjiuli, you worry too much. I like her so much. As long as you die, she'll be mine sooner or later. I won't take her life. After you die, I'll take good care of her. You're using this 9-headed bird's body to dote on her? Shinjiuli was particularly talkative this time. The body is just an external object. As long as my soul is complete, why should I waste my effort on this nine-headed bird? The bird's eyes suddenly fell on Shinjoli's body. It seemed to have thought of something and its eyes lit up. Your body is not bad. After you die, I can possess your body. That way, she might be able to accept me faster. Alright, stop wasting time. Shinjoli, as long as I don't die, this array will not be broken, and no one will be able to help you. You'd better make a decision soon. 2. He counted the second number. Shinjoli lowered his eyes and didn't say anything. Instead, he stretched out his hand and a silver-white sword appeared. He gripped the hilt of the sword and his gaze fell on the nine-headed bird again. Luo Jiuchen, don't regret this. The nine-headed bird laughed. What's there to regret if you kill yourself? Its eyes stared at Shinjoli's sword. Is this the Heavenly Path sword? So what if it is? I heard that those who are killed by the Heavenly Path sword have no chance of reincarnation. Shinjoli, if this sword kills you, it won't lose this ability. Now, stab this sword into your own heart. I know that the Heavenly Path sword will only display its true ability when it stabs there. After all, Luo Jiuchen and Shinjoli had been enemies for so many years, so he was quite knowledgeable. Alright. Shinjoli finally responded with a single word. He raised his wrist and the treasured sword was raised. The sword drew a flower in the air and stabbed towards his own chest. Cut. There was a muffled sound of flesh being pierced, and blood spurted out. It shot out like a flower. A large bird's head flew into the air along with the blood. Chapter 2300. At the same time, a silver-white ray of light flew out like a silver dragon and wrapped around the bird's head. With a twist, the bird's head let out a shrill cry and was turned into ashes by the silver-white ray of light. Great God, your sword is so cool. The nine-headed bird lost one of its heads and shivered in pain. On the other bird's head, a woman in red stood against the wind. The sky-splitter sword in her hand was still dripping with blood. Her smile was more beautiful than the spring flowers. Idiot, you took too much of a risk. Shinjoli's gaze landed on her. He wanted to swallow her with his gaze. If I didn't do that, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to kill him. Great God, I didn't tell you beforehand, but you actually cooperated with me so well. I'll give you a thumbs up. Ning Xuema smiled proudly. Shinjoli. It turned out that when Ning Xuema looked at Luo Jiuchen's skeleton in the Divine Devil enchantment, she sharply saw that there was a remnant soul with wings. The only one with wings was the ghost chariot. Ning Xuema immediately thought that the remnant soul belonged to the ghost chariot. To be exact, it belonged to one of the heads of the ghost chariot. The ghost chariot was clearly pecking at its head. How did its remnant soul get squeezed out? The only explanation was that Luo Jiuchen risked his life in the Divine Devil enchantment. When one of the heads of the ghost chariot reached in to peck at him, he used some method to squeeze his soul into the ghost chariot's head. Then, he pulled out a wisp of the ghost chariot's soul and used it as a cover on his skeleton. Ning Xuema's thoughts turned very quickly. She thought of this possibility almost instantly. The ghost chariot was placed in the enchantment by Luo Jiuchen. There might be something between him and the ghost chariot that allowed their souls to exchange. Once Luo Jiuchen successfully possessed the ghost body, he would immediately take over the thoughts of the ghost car's other heads and completely control it. The ghost chariot was originally a ferocious bird, and Luo Jiuchen was like a cockroach that could not be killed. After he merged with the ghost chariot, he could escape directly. The ghost chariot was the fastest flying animal in the world. Once it escaped, it would be extremely difficult to catch up. To kill a tiger, one had to kill it. To let a tiger return to the mountain was the worst. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble. Ning Xuema instantly understood the relationship between the two. Therefore, when she saw the ghost chariot trying to pick her up, she took the opportunity to beat it at its own game and allowed it to bite her. She had the blood of the devil Buddha. It was said that her blood was the opium poppy of all demonic creatures. It could make demonic creatures unknowingly poisoned and even soften their outer armor. The moment Ning Xuema was picked up by the ghost chariot, her soul came out of her body and attached to the other head of the nine-headed bird. She used hand gestures to tell Shinjoli to stall for time. Then, she began to block the fusion of the head that Luo Jiuchen was attached to with the other heads of the ghost chariot, so as to prevent Luo Jiuchen from attaching to the other heads after cutting off one of its heads. The ghost chariot had copper skin and iron bones. Even the most powerful magical weapon could not hurt it at all. And because Shun Jiuli was in the enchantment, he had recovered less than 1/10 of his power. If he simply used the heavenly sword to cut the ghost chariot, he would not be able to hurt it. This was also the main reason why Luo Jiuchen was not afraid that Shun Jiuli would play tricks. He had put all his energy on guard against Shun Jiuli in front of him. How could he have thought that Ning Xuema was the one who really wanted his life? After Ning Xuema was done with all this, she used the cicada shedding technique to replace her original body from the ghost chariot's mouth, leaving only a substitute. Chapter 2301. Luo Jiuchen's sense of touch was blocked, so he didn't feel anything at all. Ning Xuema's body returned to the top of the head of the ghost carriage. While Shun Jiuli attracted Luo Jiuchen's attention, she took the opportunity to cut off the head with her sword. Luo Jiuchen did not expect Ning Xuema to have such a trick up her sleeve. As expected, he fell for it. Ning Xuema sliced off the head of the ghost head with a single slash of her sword. Shun Jiuli took advantage of the situation and used the Heaven's Path sword to purify the head completely. The two of them were as fast as lightning, and their cooperation was flawless. They didn't give Luo Jiuchen any time to react. It was a pity that he prepared so many escape routes and made so many preparations, but in the end, he didn't use much. He lost his life just like that. It was his retribution. Ning Xuema stood on the neck of the nine-headed bird that was spinning in pain. She still couldn't believe it. Was Luo Jiuchen really dead? Would he never appear again? The nine-headed bird lost a head, and only then did it feel the pain. It was so painful that it spun in the air like a windmill, and it almost shook Ning Xuema off. A silver-white light lit up in the sky. It flashed a few times around the nine-headed bird. In the shrill cry, the birds' heads were cut off one by one. After a while, the nine-headed bird couldn't find its head anymore. Blood spurted out from its 9 orifices. Not only that, it was also stabbed in the chest and finally fell from the sky. It was unknown what spell Shun Jiuli used when he killed it. Such a big 9-headed bird fell into the atmosphere like a meteor and burned violently. Before it fell to the ground, it was burned to ashes, the wind blew, and the sky was clean. The 9-headed bird was killed by Shun Jiuli. At this moment, Ning Xuema was standing leisurely on a cloud, and there was a light green enchantment around her. It was a protective enchantment with healing effects. According to Shun Jiuli, it was specially used to heal the wounds caused by the 9-headed bird's bite. She had thrown caution to the wind just now. In order to use the blood poison on the 9-headed bird, she had removed her protective barrier and allowed the bird's teeth to stab her a few times. There were a few bloody wounds on her body. Originally, she did not care about this injury. However, Shun Jiuli insisted on wrapping her up like a dumpling in the green enchantment barrier. Only then did he deal with the bird. It felt good to be protected. Ning Xuema was satisfied, but she still subconsciously looked around in the air, afraid that Luo Jiuchen would suddenly come back to life in some corner and resurface again, making his presence known in front of her. Looking for what? A hand held hers. Although the hand was small, the palm was dry and warm, as if it could give people the strongest support. Did God really die that time? It won't jump out again, right? Ning Xuema asked subconsciously. It wasn't that she didn't feel safe, but that guy was like a cockroach that couldn't be killed no matter what. It had already formed a deep-rooted feeling of a cockroach in her heart. Therefore, she wasn't so sure if she could kill him. Shun Jiuli stood beside her. Seeing that her big eyes were still looking around, he quietly pulled her. Ning Xuema stumbled and fell directly onto him. If he pulled her like this normally, she would fall directly into his arms, and he would hug her tightly. Now that he pulled her, she hugged him tightly like a mother hen protecting her chick. Shun Jiuli. Ning Xuema was also stunned. She lowered her head and looked at Shun Jiuli in her arms. Such a tender almighty. Shun Jiuli was probably not used to this kind of hug. There was a suspicious blush on his white jade-like face. Chapter 2302. However, she liked his dominance. She liked it so much. Even though he had shrunk, his kiss was still as passionate as before. It made her forget that he was still a little boy. It was as if he was still a little boy. Hiss. Aya. Another one. Oh my God, it's so beautiful. Clap, clap, clap. The sound of discussion and applause grew louder and louder. It gradually turned into cheers. Ning Xuema was shocked. She finally came back to her senses and looked down. She was slightly stunned. It was no longer a green tropical forest below. Instead, it was a bustling street. People who had been reborn were running around and cheering. Even Pluto and his subordinates were there. At this moment, these people were looking up at her and him, who were floating in the air. It was obvious that the deadly bewitching array had been broken and everything had returned to normal. She actually performed a kissing show in public, and she almost lost her soul from being kissed by a Shoda. Ning Xuema felt her face turn red instantly. Even her ears were burning. She pulled Shinjoli and flew up into the sky. Ha, Devil Master, I wish you and the Divine Lord a happy marriage forever. The Netherworld King had obviously heard about the return of the Divine Lord from General Lung and the others. However, he did not expect the Divine Lord and the Devil Lord to kiss passionately in midair. Although he was stunned, he also felt warm. If it were not for these two people, the underworld would be completely doomed this time. He and his subordinates were full of gratitude. At this moment, they could not help but kneel down and congratulate them sincerely. I wish you and the Divine Lord a happy marriage forever. The people of the underworld also congratulated them loudly. Their cheers were thunderous. Above the clouds, Shinjoli listened to the cheers below and looked at her with a faint smile. Are you shy? He was a little boy, but his gaze was so real that it made Ning Xuema's heart beat wildly again. However, she had always been a stubborn person. Although her face was still as red as a tomato, she acted like a little girl. She put her arm on Shinjoli's shoulder and giggled. I don't want them to say that I took advantage of a little boy. I'm saving you some face. Shinjoli. Ning Xuema's entire body was leaning on his body. Although he was still a little short, as long as she could smell his scent again, she would be very happy. She also had the desire to hug his waist tightly and never let go. Shinjoli turned his body slightly and cleverly got rid of her posture of hugging his little brother. He moved his wrist again and pulled her over. He whispered in her ear, I'll allow you to be frivolous one more time. Then he kissed her again. The position he was standing at was very clever. He was slightly taller than her, so the kiss was especially powerful. The two of them were reunited after going through a life and death situation. Their chests were filled with intense emotions. They wanted nothing more than to fuse with each other and never be separated again. Dong dong dong. Bang bang bang. Whose heart was beating like a drum? Whose heartbeat was messing up? They kissed so passionately that they wanted nothing more than to press each other into their bodies. Shinjoli only let go of her when both of them were out of breath. Ning Xuema was satisfied, but she could not help but put her hand on her forehead. Was it really okay to be kissed by a little boy so frequently? Fortunately, they were high up in the sky and no one saw it. Otherwise, they would think that she, the Devil Lord, was a pedophile. Just as she thought of this, she suddenly seemed to notice something. She suddenly turned her head and looked in a direction. Chapter 2303. Not far away, a man was standing against the wind. He was wearing a black and scary ghost mask on his face. He was wearing a light yellow brocade robe with a strange jade pendant hanging on his waist. He was standing there with a golden ruler in his hand and was looking at them. Although he was wearing a mask and did not show his face, Ning Xuema could feel that this person was looking at them. That gaze was so penetrating that it was almost impossible to ignore it. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. When did this person come? She had always been sensitive, but she did not notice it in advance. Apparently, Shinjoli had noticed that person as well. He frowned slightly. He noticed that this person had just flown in from the west and seemed to be passing by. When Shinjoli and Ning Xuema ascended to the sky, they set up a transparent enchantment. They could see nothing outside the enchantment, but people passing by outside would not see them. Therefore, Shunjioli did not take this person's arrival seriously. He thought that this person would go directly, but he did not expect that he would stop not far away and look in their direction. Obviously, he had already seen them in the enchantment. Although Shunjioli's kung fu had not recovered, the enchantment he set up was not a small matter. Even if Yi Tianli and the others came, they would not be able to see this enchantment. Who was this person? He actually had such kung fu. He looked back at that person indifferently, as if he was weighing that person's weight. That person seemed to smile and cupped his hands in his direction. Sorry to disturb you. You can continue. His voice had obviously been altered. Although it was pleasant to the ears, it had a mechanical feel to it. It also carried a sense of laziness as if nothing was bothering him. After saying this, he did not wait for the two people to speak. His figure flashed and disappeared into the depths of the sea of clouds like a ball of pale golden light. This person came suddenly and left quickly. He did not have any evil intentions, as if he was just passing by. Who is he? Ning Xuema could not help but ask. Shunjioli pondered for a moment. Have you ever heard of a mysterious person who doesn't care about worldly affairs but appears and disappears unpredictably? Ning Xuema nodded. Could it be him? Most likely. Shunjioli's eyes flashed with a touch of contemplation. When this person was standing there just now, he looked amiable, but his aura was restrained. Wherever he went, even the dense clouds instantly scattered far away. This level of skill was probably not much weaker than his peak. Ning Xuema's current skill was also extremely high. She could also see that this person was not ordinary. She looked in the direction that the person disappeared and was slightly lost in thought. Shunjioli suddenly tightened his grip on her hand. He turned her around and looked at her sideways. I think you should be looking at me. Hadn't he just reunited with her? Shouldn't her gaze be fixed on him? Although that mysterious man was not bad-looking, it was fine for this last to take a few glances at him, but she was actually entranced by him. Ning Xuema did not pay attention to Shunjioli's emotions. She was still immersed in her thoughts. She rubbed her eyebrows. Almighty, is this person also like a demigod? Luo Jiuchen is dead this time. Will this person be the next demigod? Shunjioli said. You think too much. Well, she was a little paranoid because of that bastard Luo Jiuchen. Chapter 2304. This person was wearing a ghost mask and was very secretive. Even his voice was disguised. He was indeed worthy of the title of Mysterious Man. Moreover, this person seemed to be just passing by and did not have any bad intentions. Her attention finally returned to Shunjioli. She simply pulled him to sit in the clouds and chatted with him. Their bodies were very close together. Ning Xuema actually wanted to sit in his arms, but in view of his cute appearance, it was a little scary for such a big person like her to sit in his arms. Then, it was her turn to hug him. She raised her arms and wanted to hug him, but Shunjioli stretched out his hand and pulled her to lie on his lap. Let me see your injuries first. This position is not bad. Ning Xuema lay on his lap, took the opportunity to roll over and hugged his waist. Smelling his scent is so satisfying. Ning Xuema was like a satisfied cat, allowing Shunjioli to inspect her body. The injuries on her body were almost healed, but in front of him, she still wanted to be delicate. So, under the touch of his fingertips, she occasionally hissed and looked at him eagerly. She pouted and said, "It hurts." Her eyes were watery, and her lips were red. Shunjioli's heart skipped a beat when he saw her coquettish look. He wished he could press her under his body, however, his kung fu had not recovered, and most importantly, his appearance had not recovered. He felt pressured to have sex with her. Although his appearance was that of an 11 or 12-year-old boy, some of his physical functions were still that of an adult. It was not a problem for him to do things like a man, but he could not get over himself. However, he would not let her wait for too long. His recovery was just around the corner. If you are afraid of pain, then why did you use such a dangerous method just now? Shunjioli's voice was slightly cold. This girl was too desperate just now. The moment he saw her fall into the nine-headed bird's mouth, his heart almost stopped beating. He almost used that method regardless of the consequences. Although he was reprimanding her, His hands were gentle as he applied ointment on her wounds. On one side, Ning Xuema was enjoying his massage while on the other hand, she was unconvinced and refuted that method was the best. Otherwise, I'm afraid that bastard wouldn't have died. She flipped over on his lap and hugged one of his arms. You don't know. That bastard's evil cultivation method is much more powerful than before. He is very difficult to deal with, especially in our current state. If we want to kill him completely, it will be even more difficult. The demon god enchantment only caught him off guard and whittled away some of his power, but it is not fatal. Moreover, he used an evil technique to possess the body of the nine-headed bird. Once he succeeds in possessing the body of the nine-headed bird, who knows how many twists and turns will occur. That is why Her long eyelashes fluttered as she endlessly analyzed the pros and cons. Her analysis was clear and logical. In front of outsiders, she looked lazy, mature, and cold. But in front of him, she was like a little girl. She laughed and cried as she pleased. Shen Jiuli finished applying the ointment for her, cleaned his hands, and played with her eyelashes. Her eyelashes were thick, dense, and curly. When they rubbed against his palm, it was as if the itch could reach his heart. He listened to her analysis and smiled without saying a word. In fact, even if she did not use such a dangerous method, he still had a way to kill Luo Jiuchen. It was just that that method was a little hindrance to his divine body. However, since he had the intention to kill Luo Jiuchen, he would naturally use all kinds of methods to get rid of him completely. Chapter 2305. That person had really touched his bottom line. Ning Xuema thought of her performance just now and felt a little proud. She looked at him proudly and said, "Almighty, I'm awesome, right?" "Awesome, my Xuema is the best." Shen Jiuli was not stingy with his praise. Ning Xuema's lips curled up like a bean pod. She liked it when he said, "My Xuema." It made her feel a sense of belonging. She began to pull his hand down from her face and played with his fingers. Her voice became even more proud as she said, "I'm so awesome. It's your fortune to be able to marry me." This girl liked to boast and praise herself, but it was not annoying at all. Shen Jiuli slowly switched to his other hand and flicked her forehead. "You're wrong." Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows high. Shen Jiuli gracefully kissed her eyelashes. "It's my fortune from all my previous lives." Ning Xuema's eyelashes curved like crescent moons. "That's more like it." She had been disappointed too many times and despaired too many times. Now that happiness had come too quickly, even if she was lying beside him, she still felt like she was dreaming. "Almighty, do you think this is a dream?" She pulled on his finger and wanted to bite it to test if it was real. Shen Jiuli did not say anything and pulled her little hand over. He bit her tender white palm and looked at her with a smile that was not a smile. "Does it hurt? Doesn't this feel more real to you?" Ning Xuema felt a little pain in her palm, but her eyes narrowed with a smile. Her senses were very sharp. This proved that it was not a dream. The joy in her heart surged in her chest, making her have the urge to jump up and do a few somersaults. So happy. She was so happy that she wanted to find someone to share it with. She seemed to have thought of something as she suddenly jumped up and pulled him up as well. "Great God, our son is still waiting in Mo Palace. I'll take you to see him. He'll be so happy when he sees you. You don't know how much he misses you these days. He often cries behind your back and even calls out 'Father' in his dreams. My son will definitely go crazy with joy." When Ning Xuema thought of her son, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She had told her son that she would be back in 3 days. It had already been 3 days. That brat must be waiting anxiously in Mo Palace. Shen Jiuli, on the other hand, stood motionless. Ning Xuema tried to pull at him but to no avail. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Guru!" Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She was so focused on being happy that she forgot to test whether this great god was the great god who had transmigrated 50,000 years ago or the great god who had experienced 3 lifetimes with her. If he had traveled directly from 50,000 years ago, he would not have much of an impression of little Nianma. At most, he would have heard about him from Gu Shijio. "Great God, do you still remember? Nianma." Shinjoli smiled faintly. How can I not remember my son? She was happy and asked again, Do you mean that you have heard about him from me, or that you have taken care of him and loved him? Shinjili was still sitting there with one arm on his knee. He looked lazy. What do you think? This girl was obviously trying to get information from him. He would not tell her. Ning Xuema was speechless. Shinjuli's eyes were as deep as a well. What kind of person do you want me to be? The great god was really good at kicking the ball around. Ning Xuema's veins on her forehead twitched slightly. She laughed and said, It doesn't matter. I want both. Chapter 2306. She raised her hand to pull him again. Let's go see our son. No matter what, he's still your son. Guaranteed. You have to love him. Shinjuli finally got up, but he held her hand. The kid is not in Mo Palace. Let's go. I will take you to see him. He must be anxious. With a wave of his sleeve, he broke a wizardry barrier and flew in a certain direction. Ning Xuema's doubts could be heard in the air. If he is not in Mo Palace, where is he? I told him to wait in Mo Palace. Why did you set up a wizardry barrier? The Heavenly Law Stone felt that it was confused by little Nyenma. From the moment Shinjuli left, the kid kept walking around in the crystal hall. One moment he wanted to go out, and the next moment he ran to the crystal ball to watch. Later on, even Shinjuli disappeared into thin air on that street. Hence, this brat became even more impatient and started to run around in circles. More importantly, he was noisy. This child was probably afraid of losing his parents. After waiting for 2 hours and not seeing his parents come out, he began to tear up. He looked as if he was about to cry because he was abandoned. From time to time, he would hit the crystal wall and ask to let him out. He did not stop for a moment. The Heavenly Law Stone wanted to knock him out. As time passed, the little guy became more and more agitated. The Heavenly Law Stone could not help but try to communicate with him. It had no other choice but to give it a try. It did not expect the little guy to see it. He even understood it. This was also beyond the Heavenly Law Stone's expectation. It could only communicate with one guardian, but now it could communicate with 3 people. Was this family too abnormal, or was there something wrong with the Heavenly Law Stone? The Heavenly Law Stone was puzzled. However, it was good to be able to communicate with the little guy. It could try to reason with him and make him quiet down. Although it was a stone, it was also a cold stone. It was still a little afraid of noise. Unexpectedly, the little guy was only quiet for 3 seconds because of the shock. Then he asked a series of questions. Who are you? How can you talk in my head? Why have I never seen you before? Are my father and mother all right? Why are they not back yet? Is it dangerous in there? Little Nyenma bombarded it with dozens of questions. The Heavenly Law Stone felt that it was not in a good mood. No one knew how much time had passed. Just when the Heavenly Law Stone was about to hit the wall due to little Nyenma's nagging, a human figure finally appeared in the crystal. It was Ning Xuema and Shinjioli. And the moment they appeared, it was a hot kiss scene. Little Nyenma was still an inexperienced child. He was surprised to see his parents, but he was also puzzled. What are they doing? After the Heavenly Law Stone glanced at it, it immediately activated some sort of function to shield the crystal ball, turning it into an ordinary crystal ball. Little Nyenma was anxious. His parents had just come out, and he had not seen them clearly. He circled the crystal ball, knocking here and there, trying to restore it. Of course, while he was busy, he didn't forget to ask the Heavenly Dao Stone about the reason. The Heavenly Dao Stone simply pretended to be dead, not even spitting out a comma. Little Nyenma was so anxious that he almost flattened the crystal ball. The crystal ball flashed a few times and lit up again. Little Nyenma was overjoyed. His eyes were wide open. He sat there and stared at the crystal ball, watching the images gradually appear on it. Then he was stunned. The crystal ball showed a sky with a few white clouds floating in it, but there was no one in sight. The mighty immortal and Xuema had been suffering for so long, so they wrote a few sweet scenes. The most romantic thing I can think of is to stay in your arms until the end of time. The most romantic thing I can think of is to be with you all the time, giving me flowers with monthly tickets. Moi. Chapter 2307. Little Nyenma was very puzzled. He adjusted the crystal ball a few more times and saw the streets. He saw the bustling crowd and all kinds of vendors. The originally ghost street had returned to its usual bustling state. However, his parents were nowhere to be seen. The heavenly law stone was also a little puzzled. It also secretly adjusted the crystal ball's position. As long as Shinjoli and little Nyenma were nearby, it should be able to see them. However, it still saw a blue sky and white clouds. There was not even a bird flying in the sky. What was going on? The heavenly law stone was also puzzled. When it was about to adjust the angle again, little Nyenma suddenly shouted, "Someone is up there. Hey, who is this person? He is wearing a yellow robe. Is he the emperor?" The heavenly law stone looked inside and saw a man in a light yellow robe flying over. The man seemed to have seen something. He was facing one direction and stopped. Because he was wearing a mask on his face, little Nyenma could not see his face clearly. He only felt that the man had a very good figure and an extraordinary temperament. The man was originally looking in one direction. Suddenly, he seemed to have noticed something and turned to look at them. His gaze was tangible, as if he could see through the crystal ball and look at little Nyenma. Shin Nyenma's little heart skipped a beat. He opened his mouth slightly. Fortunately, the man turned his head again and nodded slightly in one direction. He said, "Sorry to disturb you. You can continue." Then, he turned into a light golden stream and disappeared without a trace. Little Nyenma was very puzzled. Who was the man talking to? He only saw big white clouds in that direction, but he did not see anyone. The man looked casual, but his aura was not small. Even the heavenly law stone had an inexplicable feeling in its heart when it saw him. Fortunately, the man came and went quickly. In the blink of an eye, his shadow was gone. Therefore, the heavenly law stone suppressed the strange feeling in its heart and focused on turning the crystal ball again and again, trying to find the two people. While he was busy, the silhouettes of the two people suddenly appeared on the crystal ball out of thin air. The two of them were holding each other's hands as they rushed over at lightning speed. From Ning Shuema's question, the heavenly law stone finally understood why it could not see them just now. It turned out that Shinjioli wanted to be intimate with his wife and didn't want others to see them, so he set up a barrier. The heavenly law stone heaved a sigh of relief. Some of the scenes were indeed not suitable for children. The Divine Lord finally remembered that his son was staring at the crystal ball and knew to cover it up. "Mother! Mother!" Little Nyenma cheered excitedly. The heavenly Dao stone was a little puzzled after hearing him call out a few times. Finally, it couldn't help but refresh the screen. "Why don't you call me Daddy?" Little Nyenma paused and looked at Shinjoli in the crystal ball. "He looks like my brother." She was still a little uncertain. "Is he really my father? Could he be her brother?" Heavenly Dao stone. Suddenly, it had the urge to watch the show. It wondered how the Divine Lord would react when little Nyenma called him brother. That's not right. They were coming in the direction of it. Was the Supreme Divinity trying to bring his wife into the heavenly Dao stone to see his son? What would it become then? Where was his dignity? The heavenly law stone made a prompt decision and immediately ran away. Little Nyenma was jumping around when suddenly, the crystal hall under him spun at a high speed. Chapter 2308. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and immediately hugged the crystal pillar next to him. The heavenly law stone was running too fast. Even with his kung fu, little Nyenma was still dizzy from the shaking. If his arms and legs were not wrapped around the crystal pillar, he would have rolled around the hall like a rubber ball. "But what are you doing? Why are you running?" Little Nyenma shouted. Before he could finish his sentence, the heavenly law stone suddenly braked, and little Nyenma almost flew out. What was wrong with the stone? Little Nyenma looked up and was about to say something. Suddenly, his eyes were fixed on the crystal ball next to him. He shouted happily, "Mother!" His mother was standing outside, and of course, the boy who seemed to be his father was standing side by side with his mother. Ning Shuema did not expect that Shinjioli would bring her to see her son. He said that he wanted to bring her to see her son, but he actually used the earth escape technique. She was confused. When she was about to ask, Shinjuli only said, "You will know when you get there." Ning Xuema simply didn't ask any more questions. She only followed him underground at lightning speed. After a while, Shinjuli stopped at a place with her, as if he was waiting for something. She looked at the gray rock layer around her and did not see anything unusual. She was a little surprised and wanted to ask why the Almighty brought her here. However, before she could speak, there was a vibration under her feet. Then she saw a white stone rolling toward her at lightning speed. Wherever it went, all the rocks automatically made way for it. The stone looked very familiar. It seemed to be the Heavenly Law Stone. Ning Xuema never thought that she would meet it here. Even more so, she didn't think that it would have such a panicked appearance as if it was running for its life. Therefore, she jumped out and blocked the Heavenly Law Stone, forcing it to stop. "The Heavenly Law Stone?" Ning Xuema asked. "It is not me." The Heavenly Law Stone subconsciously replied. It was also very bitter in its heart. Shouldn't these two people be chasing after it? Why did it appear in front of him? With its terrifyingly precise calculation ability, if these two people had rushed to where it was just now, discovered that it was gone, and then chased after it by following its tracks, it should have already run back to Mo Palace. However, it did not expect that these two people would not act according to common sense at all. They directly intercepted it, as if they already knew that it was going to escape. Ning Xuema couldn't help but laugh when she saw how the stone was trying to hide itself. "Heavenly Dao Stone, why are you here? Shouldn't you be in the Fantian Palace?" The Heavenly Dao Stone. It was also at a loss for words. Ning Xuema didn't get a reply from the Heavenly Dao Stone. She finally remembered why she was here. She tugged on the Great God's sleeve and asked, "Great God, aren't we looking for our son?" Before Shinjuli could answer, the Heavenly Dao Stone in front of him suddenly flashed with white light, and a whirlpool appeared. Then, a person was pushed out from the whirlpool. "Mother!" That person cried out in joy and threw himself into her arms like a cannonball. Ning Xuema, she naturally recognized her son and subconsciously hugged him tightly. Then, she looked at the Heavenly Dao Stone that had returned to its original state with a face full of disbelief. How did her son run out from the Heavenly Dao Stone's stomach? What happened when she was not in Mo Palace for a few days? Could the Heavenly Dao Stone's stomach hold a person? Could it be that the Heavenly Dao Stone was female? Ning Xuema was full of doubts, but she forgot that the Heavenly Dao Stone could read her thoughts since it was so close to her. She suddenly felt that she had lost all faith as a stone. Chapter 2309. I am a chaotic being. What do you mean by male or female? It angrily complained in Ning Xuema's mind. Ning Xuema looked at Shinjuli who was standing beside her. She saw that he was just looking at them with his arms crossed. She quickly pulled up her son who was almost glued to her lap. She pointed at Shinjuli and said, "Nianma, haven't you always been thinking about your father? Have you met him? Quickly, greet your father." Otherwise, Shinjuli would not know that Nianma was hiding in the stomach of the stone. Shen Nianma finally raised his head and looked at Shinjuli who was only a few years older than him. He hesitated and finally called out, "Father? Father?" He blinked his eyes and felt a little strange. He actually saw his father wearing a tutu. He did not know which family had such a privilege. In fact, he wanted to jump into his father's arms, but looking at his father who was like a little brother, he was too embarrassed to do so. Shinjuli glanced at his son. His son's little thoughts could not be hidden from his eyes. He waved at him and said, "Nianma, come here." After all, it was the nature of father and son. Shen Nianma hesitated for a moment, but he still ran over and looked up at his father. "Father? Father?" Shinjuli carried him in his arms and stroked his hair gently. "Don't you recognize your father, Nianma?" Shen Nianma smelled the familiar scent on his body and finally found some feeling. He suddenly raised his little hand and raised it to hug his father's neck. "I recognize you. Father, when you are free, can you turn into a doll wearing a tutu and play with me again?" Shinjuli was speechless. Ning Xuema was speechless. She could not help but laugh. Did her son see his father wearing a doo-doo? If that was the case, her son's image of the great god would be ruined. Just when she thought of this, she saw a faint white light coming out from Shinjoli's palm. She instantly understood what Shinjoli wanted to do. She opened her mouth but didn't say anything to stop him. If her son saw her wearing open-crotch pants, she would have the urge to erase his memory. A moment later, Shin Yinma fell asleep on Shinjoli's shoulder. First of all, his nerves had been tense all day, and now that he was relaxed, he was indeed sleepy. Secondly, after a part of one's memory was erased, one would feel a little sleepy. He patted his son's back and looked up to see Ning Xuema looking at him with a faint smile. Guru, you're starting to erase my son's memory again. You've erased mine before, but I've recovered later. Do you want to erase mine too? Back then, when she saw him wearing a doo-doo, she mistook him for a ginseng baby. Shinjoli held her hand and pulled her towards the heavenly Tao stone. When you saw me, it proved that we were fated to be together. Since you are my wife, it doesn't matter if you saw me. But his son couldn't. Don't worry, I'm only erasing a small part of his memory. It won't affect him at all. He was his own son, so he naturally did not want him to be hurt. Ning Xuema's heart suddenly moved. The great god knew about erasing her memory. Did it mean that he was the great god who had experienced 3 lifetimes with her? Her eyes immediately became lively. She held Shinjoli's hand tightly. It was as if she was holding the whole world in her hands. Then, she looked at little Nyenma in his arms and breathed a sigh of relief. This was her husband and her son. Now, the family of 3 was reunited. She had finally completed her journey. Chapter 23:10. The most romantic thing I can think of is to raise the child with you, to be with you until the end of time, she sang softly. Her heart was filled with happiness that was about to overflow. The heavenly Tao stone wanted to sneak away when the family was reunited. However, it was shocked when it saw Shinjoli dragging his wife and child toward it. What are you doing? Shinjoli answered concisely, send us back to Mo Palace. The heavenly Tao stone was unyielding. I'm the heavenly Tao stone, not a carriage. Was he really using it as a transportation tool? Shinjoli took out 7 or 8 red crystals and tossed them to the stone. You don't want these anymore? The blood crystals were full of energy. The heavenly Tao stone was almost startled. However, it was the heavenly Tao stone, the only high-class stone in the world. Giving in for a few pieces of jade seemed to be degrading its style. Shinjoli glanced at it. With a flick of his finger, another 4 blood-red beads flew out from his fingertips. Do you recognize this item? The heavenly Tao stone was shocked. The inner core of a top-grade demon. This was something that could only be found by chance. It immediately flooded Shinjoli's mind. The extreme demonic pill. By the way, supreme divinity, although this thing can quickly improve one's skills, its demonic nature is very strong. You can't use it, or else you'll easily go mad and affect your divine body. You're quite knowledgeable. I don't need it, but I can give it to Xuema, Shinjoli answered casually. She can't use it either. Her Buddhist nature is stronger than her demonic nature. If she consumes this pearl, it will greatly damage her Buddhist nature. The heavenly Tao stone advised earnestly. Shinjoli glanced at it and kept the inner cores. Then let's keep it first and give it to the fated one in the future. The heavenly Tao stone immediately said sincerely, I am the fated one. I can dissolve the evil aura above and only absorb the energy above. If it absorbed these inner cores and the blood crystal jade, it would definitely be able to recover to its original level within a day. What about sending us back to Mo Palace? The heavenly Tao stone didn't care about its principles anymore. Okay, I'll give it to you. I'll do it. Ning Xuema looked at the hall filled with crystals and Shinjoli, who was sitting on the crystal lotus. She didn't expect that there would be another world inside the heavenly Tao stone. Needless to say, the Almighty was reborn here. Shinjoli gave the heavenly Tao stone an extreme demonic pill and a blood crystal jade. After the heavenly Tao stone was digested, the entire stone was as excited as if it had been injected with chicken blood. Like a whirlwind, It brought the family of three straight to Mo Palace. Ning Xuema was sitting in the pavilion in the garden, drinking tea leisurely. Because the resentment between heaven and earth had been removed, the weather had returned to normal. From time to time, a few wisps of white clouds would float across the sky. The sky was high, the clouds were light, and the flowers and trees were flourishing. Everything could not be better. Ning Xuema casually caught the petals that fluttered over and sighed. She hadn't seen Shinjiuli for 3 days. After the family of three returned to Mo Palace that day, Shinjiuli didn't appear in front of everyone. Instead, he sent Ning Xuema and their son out of the heavenly Dao stone and asked them to return to the ground. He didn't come out with them. Ning Xuema knew that he was in a hurry to cultivate and recover his power, so she didn't force him. She brought their son out in front of everyone first. Her safe return naturally caused a stir. The entire Mo Palace was filled with joy. Chapter 23:11. Ning Xuema's story in the underworld had spread all over the 6 realms. Her reputation could not be any more well-known. Many people came to visit and congratulate her. Mo Palace was bustling with noise and excitement. The news of the Divine Lord's resurrection had also spread all over the world. Those who came to congratulate her naturally asked about the whereabouts of the Divine Lord. General Manager Heimu received Ning Xuema's order and rejected all the questions with the excuse that the Divine Lord had returned to Fantian Palace. Everyone knew that the Divine Lord had always been indifferent and low-key. He did not like to socialize. It was reasonable for him to return to Fantian Palace to recuperate after his resurrection, so no one asked any more. The hustle and bustle lasted for 2 days before it finally quieted down. Ning Xuema finally had some free time to stroll around the garden and drink tea. At this moment, she was a little lost in her thoughts as she looked at the petals. Was the great deity really back? Everything was not a dream, was it? She rubbed her eyebrows and felt that she was beginning to worry about her gains and losses again. She looked at the lawn not far away. When she and little Nianma were sent out by the heavenly law stone, they emerged from there. The heavenly law stone should still be in that position, right? She had used the ground drilling spell to search the place more than 10 times, but she still could not find the shadow of the stone. The more she could not find it, the more uncertain she felt. There was always a sense of emptiness in her heart. Part of little Nianma's memory had been wiped away by Shinjiuli. He could not remember anything about his father in the heavenly law stone. This made Ning Xuema feel that she was still dreaming. The air was filled with the fragrance of the plants. Ning Xuema slowly walked down and circled around the lawn. She was wondering if she should go down to look for it again. She did not want to disturb Shinjiuli. She just wanted to make sure that she could find the stone. "Mother!" Little Nianma rushed to her and threw himself into her arms. Ning Xuema picked up her son and pinched his arms and legs. She was pleased to find that the little guy had grown a little chubbier. Now, it looked white and tender, like a pink glutinous rice ball. Strangely enough, little Nianma was very clingy on the first day when she came back. He followed her around like a little tail. He would look for her whenever she was not around. Even when Ning Xuema met with the leaders of the 6 realms, he followed her everywhere as if he had been abandoned. But the next day, it was as if he had suddenly grown up. He told her that he wanted to concentrate on his cultivation. He wanted to practice his martial arts to be very powerful so that he could protect his mother. Ning Xuema was naturally gratified by her son's ambition, so she stopped caring about him. He only wanted Bai Zhe to follow him. She hadn't seen her son for 2 days. Now that she saw him running over, she was naturally happy. She picked her son up and kissed him on the cheek. At the same time, she asked her son about his homework and what he had learned in the past 2 days. Little Nianma pondered for a moment and took out 2 drawings from his pocket. He handed them to Ning Xuema and asked, "Mother, what do you think of my drawing skills?" Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. She hadn't forgotten the small figure drawn by her son, so she just casually glanced at it. Her eyes widened at what she saw. There were 2 sets of wedding clothes in the drawing. Although the style of the drawing was still immature, the characteristics of the wedding clothes could be clearly drawn. It was very much like a modern design of clothing drawings. She hadn't seen her son for a few days, but his drawing skills had improved by leaps and bounds. It seemed that he had inherited it from his father. Ning Xuema was very pleased to see it. She gave her son a thumbs up and praised him generously. Chapter 23:12. Little Nianma smiled and shook her arm. He asked her which of the two sets of wedding dresses was the most beautiful, and the one she liked the most. Ning Xuema looked at it carefully and pointed at one of the sets. Mother likes this one. She liked the style and the cloud pattern of the wedding dress. She had never seen this wedding dress before, but it was the style she liked. However, she was still a little puzzled. Her son was so young. Why did he want to draw such a wedding dress? Did he want to get married? Isn't this a little too precocious? Also, the design of the wedding dress was very beautiful. It did not seem like it was designed by little Nianma himself. She asked her son in a joking tone, "Nianma, did you think of the wedding dress by yourself?" Little Nianma paused and immediately shook his head. "No, Baizhe gave me a picture book. I thought it looked good, so I copied two sets." So that was it. The little guy's taste was good. It actually overlapped with hers. Actually, she liked the two sets of wedding clothes on the top. "Mother, I have to go and practice." "Goodbye, Mother." Little Nianma kissed her face and then jumped down from the ground and ran away. Ning Xuema was speechless. The little guy was running a little too fast. She had not had enough affection with her son. Her son did not seem to be clingy with her at all. Sigh, she seemed to be a little disappointed. It was said that boys would not be clingy with adults until they were 12 or 13 years old. Was it too early for Nianma? The boy was only 6 months old. He even drew the wedding dress and came to ask her if it looked good. Did he really have a crush on a little girl? Thinking up to this point, Ning Xuema felt that it was a bit funny, so she tossed this question aside. She circled around the grassland, but in the end, she didn't give up. She once again burrowed into the ground and carefully searched for a long time, but she still couldn't find the white stone's shadow. At night, when Ning Xuema was about to go to bed, little Nianma appeared at her door with a pillow and looked at her eagerly. "Mother, can I sleep with you tonight?" Ning Xuema naturally won't object. She nodded, "Okay." She hasn't slept with her son in her arms for a long time. She misses it. Little Nianma cheered and immediately climbed onto her bed. He lay down obediently on the bed. Ning Xuema also got on the bed and held her son in her arms. The little guy was chubby and warm, and it felt very comfortable to hold him in her arms. "Mother, can Nianma sleep with you often in the future?" "Sure." Ning Xuema answered casually. She was quite willing to sleep with her son in her arms. It was like hugging a warm pillow. But the little fellow cheered and snuggled deeper into her embrace. He was still a child and liked to sleep in his mother's arms. That way, he would feel more secure. However, someone said that he was not allowed to sleep with his mother in the future. Now that he had gotten his mother's approval, he immediately smiled. As long as his mother agreed, other people's opinions could be ignored. Little Nianma was very satisfied with the answer that he wanted. Then he thought of something else. "Mother, tomorrow is your birthday. What do you want as a gift?" Her son was so filial. He actually thought of her birthday gift. If her son did not mention it, she would have almost forgotten about it. In fact, what she wanted was very simple. She wanted Shinjuli to come back so that the family of 3 could reunite and never be separated again. Chapter 23:13. Tomorrow was her birthday, but there was no news from Shinjuli. She was afraid that he could not remember her birthday. After all, they had been apart for a long time, and they had been through so many life and death situations. How could he remember her birthday? If it was not a dream, he should still be practicing. He would only appear when he fully recovered. She did not know when he would recover. She was a little distracted. Shen Nianma waited for a while, but she did not answer. He could not help but ask her again. Ning Xuema lowered her head to look at her son's big eyes. She lowered her head and kissed his forehead. "No matter what gift Nianma prepares for you, you will like it." Shen Nianma was full of confidence. "I will give you an unforgettable birthday present." Both of them were chatting while lying on the bed. Little Nianma was still a child after all. He could not bear it any longer. When he was about to fall asleep, he was still worried about Ning Xuema. Mother, you have to hug Nianma more often in the future. Don't fool a child. Ning Xuema remembered that she and her son had been apart for a long time. The little guy had gone through so many hardships at such a young age. She felt guilty and promised, "Okay, I won't fool you. Nianma can sleep with mother whenever he wants to." With this promise, Shun Nianma was finally able to sleep without any worries. Ning Xuema had a habit of waking up early every day. She would wake up at 6 o'clock every day. Shun Nianma was still a child, so he was not willing to wake up early. It was not easy to wake him up. Today, Ning Xuema opened her eyes on time, but she found that her son, who had been sleeping next to her, was gone. She was shocked and quickly contacted her son with a directed audio spell. The little guy's voice was heard. "Mother, I want to prepare a birthday present for you. See you later." Ning Xuema couldn't help but laugh. The little guy was really cute. In order to prepare a birthday present for her, he unexpectedly woke up early for the first time. She washed up a little. She did not care much about her birthday. She opened the door and was about to go to the study room to deal with the backlog of work. However, she saw General Manager Heimu standing outside the door. Behind him was a string of maids from Mo Palace. Today, head steward Heimu was wearing a new robe. His face was glowing and there was a smile on his face. He looked as spirited as a bridegroom. The maids behind him were also dressed in new clothes, and they were even holding trays in their hands. Ning Xuema raised an eyebrow. Steward Heimu usually only came here when he had something urgent to report. What was going on today? And he even brought so many people with him. Before she could ask, head steward Heimu took a step forward and said, "Congratulations, Devil Master." "Congratulations." The maids behind him followed suit and bowed. "Congratulations, Devil Lord. Congratulations." Ning Xuema. Was Chief Steward Heimu putting on a show? This line was a good play. She almost followed the script and asked him, "Where did the joy come from?" Fortunately, she stopped herself and only looked at him. "Heimu, are you all right?" She felt that he was a little strange today. Head Steward Heimu smiled. "Devil Master, listen. What's that noise outside?" Ning Xuema. She listened carefully and faintly heard the sound of music from the front. The music sounded very festive, as if there was a happy occasion. She suddenly realized that Steward Heimu was going to celebrate her birthday, right? Chapter 23:14. She looked at the 2 rows of people behind Heimu and shook her head. "You're making it too grand." She wasn't an old lady in her 70s or 80s. Today is such a joyous day. It's not too much to make it as grand as possible. Head Steward Heimu bowed again, then waved at the 2 rows of maids behind him. "Help the Devil Master get dressed." Ning Xuema was speechless. All right, it was rare for them to make it so grand. She couldn't reject their enthusiasm. So be it. She was going to be the birthday girl for once. "Devil Master, may this subordinate be so bold as to ask you something?" Head Steward Heimu bowed again. "What is it?" "Devil Master, when the maids dress you up later, can you close your eyes and not look at them? This subordinate wants you to open your eyes again. This subordinate wants to give you a big surprise." Head Steward Heimu was getting more and more mysterious today. Ning Xuema was very confident in Head Steward Heimu. Since he wanted to give her a surprise, she would wait for it. She had been a little bored these past 2 days, so it was fun to look forward to it. She would just treat it as sharing the joy with the people. Ning Xuema was a woman of her word. When the maids helped her get dressed, she didn't peek at them at all. She only felt that the clothes she was wearing today were especially complicated, and her hair was combed especially tightly. She even seemed to be wearing a veil. Ning Xuema knew how to dress up. She didn't even need to open her eyes. Just by looking at their actions on her face, she could tell what kind of makeup they put on her face. It wasn't a prank. If she wasn't mistaken, it should be extremely exquisite. Outside, the sound of a string instrument was melodious, cheerful and pleasant to the ear. Ning Xuema sat there and listened, feeling very comfortable. It seemed that Head Steward Heimu had put in a lot of effort today. The song he chose was also one she liked, so she liked it very much. After the maids finished helping her get dressed, they helped her up. She didn't know what material the clothes were made of. Although it was complicated, it was strangely smooth on her body. It didn't feel cumbersome at all. The music outside suddenly stopped, and another piece of heavenly music descended from the sky. It sounded as if countless heavenly flowers were falling from the sky. The music was also joyous and festive. It was composed of guqin, pipa, flute, shao, kongho, suona, and so on. The music played by so many musical instruments was unusually harmonious and pleasing to the ears. This piece of music was well arranged. Every single instrument was played to its best standard. Ning Xuema gave the composer a thumbs up in her heart. The maids clustered around her as they walked out of the hall. The music outside was even louder and clearer. In the midst of the music, her hand was suddenly held by someone. She subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand, but it was held tightly by that hand. That hand was warm and familiar. Ning Xuema's heart was beating wildly. Before she opened her eyes, she could smell a faintly discernible cold fragrance. At this moment, head steward He Mu's voice sounded at the right time. Devil Master, please open your eyes. Ning Xuema opened her eyes. Her gaze collided with a pair of deep blue eyes. That pair of eyes was slightly curved, and they were filled with a warm smile. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Shinjiuli! He finally came. He finally appeared in front of her again. At this moment he was holding her hand, and their fingers were intertwined. Did he come to celebrate her birthday? Ning Xuema's gaze shifted from his face to their intertwined hands, and then back to his body. Then her small mouth opened slightly. You. Chapter 23:15. Shinjiuli's outfit today was very different from the usual. His white robe was now red like fire. She knew better than anyone else that Shinjiuli was obsessed with the color of his clothes. Shinjiuli did not like red. At least, he did not like to wear red. She had known him for so long, but she had never seen him wear red. The most he would wear was a red plum embroidered on his white robe. Today he was wearing a red robe. Judging from the style, it was the splendid red robe worn by the bridegrooms. Of course, the red robe he wore was much better than the other bridegrooms in terms of style and quality. It looked simple, but the tailoring was very fitting. It made his body look taller and taller. Ning Xuema had always thought that Shinjiuli was not suited to wear red. She did not expect him to look so elegant in it. His face was undoubtedly very handsome. When he looked at her with a smile, he was like a shining body that attracted everyone's attention. Especially the women around him, they could not help but gasp. They could not take their eyes off him. When Ning Xuema saw him appear in front of her wearing a red robe, her heart skipped a beat. In a split second, she knew what was going on. She subconsciously looked at herself. Indeed, she was wearing a red wedding dress. The wedding dress looked like... Ning Xuema's heart suddenly skipped a beat. The wedding dress looked like the one that little Nianma asked her to choose for herself. She was wearing a wedding dress? Was she finally going to marry him? Although they even had a child, they did not officially hold any ceremony. He also did not give her any official status. And after so many life and death separations, she had completely forgotten about this. She thought that as long as the three of them were reunited, it would be the greatest happiness. She did not expect that he would give her such a big surprise. On her birthday, he came to marry her. Xuema, will you marry me? Shinjiuli's voice was heard. It was as magnetic and cold as the spring in the forest. His deep eyes looked at her as if he wanted to suck her soul in. How could she not be willing? She did not know how long she had been looking forward to this day. Was this considered a marriage proposal? Although this proposal was made during the wedding ceremony, it wasn't too late. Ning Xuema's nose suddenly felt a little sour, but she tilted her head and looked at him with a faint smile. You didn't tell me in advance about such a big thing? Did you want to give me a surprise? Shinjiuli smiled and held her even tighter. Yes. Do you like it? I like it. She loved it so much. She was about to go crazy with love. The bubbles of joy in his heart were already bubbling. Ning Xuema finally understood what it meant to have a heart full of blooming flowers. This was it. She really felt the flowers in her heart blossoming one by one, each blossoming with joy. She didn't say anything for a while. Shenjiuli thought she was blaming him for arranging the wedding without discussing it with her. He said in a low voice, "Xuema, it's my fault for not discussing it with you in advance. If I like it." Ning Xuema suddenly opened her mouth and interrupted him. Her eyes were bright, and her voice was clear and loud. Everyone present could hear her. "I do." Thunderous applause rang out from all around. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief and cheers rang out. Ning Xuema looked around and realized that the outside of her bedroom was already decorated with lanterns and streamers. It was splendid and splendid, with red silk ribbons fluttering in the wind. Chapter 23:16. Obviously, these were all arranged in the middle of the night to give her a surprise. Every arrangement was ingenious. It seemed that everyone in the Mo Palace knew about this wedding, except for her, the most important person involved. They must have put in a lot of effort to create this surprise for her, right? Manager He Mu, who was standing not far away, also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. This idea was proposed by Shenjiuli. He was the one who arranged everything in the Mo Palace secretly. He was afraid that the Devil Master would blame him at this moment, but now he was finally relieved. The Devil Master was a generous and straightforward woman. If she liked something, she would like it. She would not be bashful. Shenjiuli also smiled as if a burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He lifted her up and said, "Xuema, come home with me." He walked towards the gorgeous wedding car not far away. Ning Xuema felt that everything that happened next was like a beautiful dream. The wedding car sent by Shenjiuli was a wedding car woven with fresh flowers. There were clusters of red flowers that looked like peonies blooming on the car. The flowers were sparkling and translucent like dewdrops. There were sharp pearl tassels hanging around the wedding car. When they swayed slightly, they flashed with a dreamy luster. The interior of the car was also covered with flower petals. Ning Xuema sat in the car and felt like she was sitting in a sea of flowers. She was sitting on soft petals, which was more comfortable than clouds. Shenjiuli sat behind her. She leaned in his arms and looked at the floating white clouds outside the car. The car was pulled by a red phoenix. It flew quickly and steadily in the air. There were various musicians playing in front of the wedding car. Every tune was beautiful and moving. Among the musicians, there was one person who attracted the most attention. That person was dressed in green. He was tall and straight. Looking at his back, one would think that he was very handsome. Ning Xuema's gaze fell on that person's back. She felt that that person was very familiar. That person seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly turned around and nodded at her, who had just stuck her head out of the car window. Ning Xuema's eyes widened. That person was Yi Tianli. So he really was still alive, he really wasn't dead. The videos Luo Jiuchen showed her that day were all lies. She did not kill her friend by mistake. Ning Xuema heaved a long sigh of relief, and the last bit of gloominess in her heart disappeared. But this fellow was really something else. He said he'd come down to the mortal world to help her find medicine, but he never turned back. No one had seen him since, causing her to think that he'd really fallen into Luo Jiuchen's hands. But now it seemed that wasn't the case. Shenjiuli hugged her from behind and seemed to sense her emotions. He smiled and tightened his arms around her waist. He was indeed captured by Luo Jiuchen that day and was indeed trapped on the totem pole. However, he was trapped in the Western Array core. I had already rescued him before I broke the array. It turned out that Luo Jiuchen was not completely lying. There was indeed a sacrifice trapped on the totem pole, but he also sensed that Yi Tianli had escaped at the first moment, so he mistakenly thought that it was Yi Tianli who had broken the West Formation Eye. He was resentful that he did not kill him in time. Ning Xuema suddenly seemed to think of something. Then, who was trapped on the totem pole in the Northern Array core? In other words, who did she accidentally kill? Shenjiuli said lazily in her ear, "Not every totem pole can trap people." Ning Xuema's eyes lit up. Did that mean that there was no one on the north totem pole? She breathed a sigh of relief and patted her chest. That's good. Shinjioli's eyes flashed slightly. He smiled and said nothing. Indeed, not every totem pole could trap people. For example, the totem pole in the south was empty, but the one in the north that Ning Xuema had broken originally trapped people. Chapter 23:17. The one who was trapped was the former heavenly emperor, Yunlang. However, Shinjioli did not intend to let Ning Xuema know the truth, lest she felt guilty again. He did not want her to have any psychological burden. At this moment, he was very close to her, and there was almost no gap between them. His warm breath blew directly into her ear, making her ear itchy and warm. The atmosphere in the car was faintly ambiguous. Shinjioli hugged her in his arms and smelled the faint fragrance on her body. His heartbeat gradually quickened, but he restrained himself and did not let himself take the next step. Everything would be left in that moment. She would completely become his, from her body to her heart. They would have a lot of time to spend with each other, to make love. However, it was a little difficult to restrain himself at this moment. Shinjioli's body was slightly stiff. Of course, Ning Xuema did not know that he was in a dilemma at this moment. Her body leaned against his broad chest as if she was leaning against the whole world, and her heart was bubbling with warmth. She had never thought that a person could be so happy to this extent. This kind of happiness seemed to overflow from her chest, and it made her eyebrows curl and the corners of her lips curl up. She felt that it was not enough, and she wanted to be more intimate with him. She turned around and hugged his waist, leaning her head on his chest to listen to his steady and powerful heartbeat. Then she realized that his heartbeat seemed to be a little fast, and it seemed to be getting faster and faster. Almighty, your heartbeat is so fast. Dong, dong, dong. It vibrated her eardrums, making her heartbeat faster for no reason. Shinjioli. He was trying hard to restrain himself, but this girl still teased him. He did not say anything, but he did not hug her back. Ning Xuema looked up and met his deep eyes, and her heart skipped a beat. He clearly didn't do anything, but Ning Xuema had an inexplicable feeling of being swallowed by him. She coughed and looked down, past his tall nose, and landed on his beautiful light red lips. His lips were light, but there was a kind of captivating charm, which made Ning Xuema want to kiss him again. At this time, she would naturally do whatever she wanted to do, so she kissed him directly. Shinjioli's body stiffened slightly, and his fingers clenched by his side. Ning Xuema licked his lips, and his lips were slightly pursed, and he did not respond to her. Ning Xuema did not give up, and used the tip of her tongue to trace his lips, but she still did not get a response. He lost interest in her so quickly. They had met after such a long separation. He did not even give her a proper kiss. Ning Xuema felt a little wronged, pursed her lips, and wanted to take a step back. Her waist was suddenly hugged tightly by him. Then, the world spun around her. When she opened her eyes, she was already pinned down by his body. His breath was scorching hot, and his voice was slightly hoarse. Xuema, do you want me to take you here? Their bodies were pressed together without any gap, and she could clearly feel the change in his body. A certain part of him was as hard as iron. Her face suddenly turned red. Although the inside of the car was magnificent, there was a wedding procession outside the car, and there were people all around. Although she had always been open-minded, she did not want to do it in this place. Moreover, she was wearing a bridal gown. Although the gown was very beautiful, it had a very bad problem. It was not easy to put it on or take it off, and it could only be used once. Once it was taken off, it would not be able to return to its original state. Chapter 23:18. She did not want to be disheveled when she got out of the car. She coughed and pushed him away. No, I don't want to. Well, get up. Let's talk. Shinjioli took a deep breath and lay down beside her. He calmed his breath and asked her lazily, "What do you want to talk to me about?" There were too many things that she wanted to talk to him about. She thought of the most important one. Where is Nianma? Shinjioli traced her mouth with his finger. Can you guess where he is? Ning Xuema had a sudden idea. Is he in the Fantian Palace? Smart. Shin Jiuli praised her. Ning Xuema turned over and held his restless hand. Little Nianma should know about the wedding today, right? Have you discussed it with him? When did you crawl out of the heavenly law stone? The first thing you did after crawling out was not to see me. She asked a series of questions. Shin Jiuli laughed. How can I surprise you if I see you in advance? As for the recovery, I only fully recovered in the early hours of this morning. In other words, he only came out of the heavenly law stone today. Ning Xuema was bewildered. But from what I see, this formation of yours doesn't seem to be something you came up with on the spot. The wedding seemed simple, but it was complicated. Moreover, he had made it so grand that it had never been before. Shen Jiuli played the flute between his fingers. Haven't you heard of the word strategizing? Even if he was in the heavenly law stone, he could still command people to do those complicated things. Well, what you said makes sense. However, the 2 wedding pictures that Nianma made were drawn by you, right? Did you ask him to copy them? So, you have met him before yesterday. Since you did not come out in advance, how did you meet him? Shin Jiuli raised his hand and touched her head. Then, he told her a more exciting news. Nianma can go in and out of the heavenly law stone at will these 2 days. Some of my orders were sent out by him. It turned out that the little guy had actually done so many things behind the scenes. She looked at him. The 8 great divine beasts also knew about it in advance, right? Over the past 3 days, she hadn't seen the shadows of the 8 divine beasts at all. At that time, head steward He Mu had said that the 8 divine beasts, aside from Bai Zhe, were all in closed-door cultivation. She had believed it to be true, but this time, there were 8 mythological beasts in the wedding procession brought by Shin Jiuli. The one pulling the carriage was the fire phoenix, while the ones clearing the way were the soaring serpent and Qiongqi. Bai Zhe was holding the line, and there were a few other divine beasts on both sides and at the back. Not one of the 8 divine beasts was missing. All of them were in high spirits, beaming with joy. The 8 mythological beasts became the main force and auspicious beasts of the wedding procession. Who in the 6 realms would be so generous? Moreover, judging from their formation, it was obvious that they were well-trained and had rehearsed in advance. Ning Xuema's question hit the nail on the head. Shin Jiuli smiled and said nothing. It turned out that the whole world knew about it, and she was the only one who was kept in the dark. She was such a smart person, but she was actually kept in the dark. They had made such a big scene, but they did not give themselves away in advance. Needless to say, Shin Jiuli was secretly directing all of this. The Almighty was indeed a black-bellied master. Ning Xuema looked at his eyebrows and asked, Almighty, how many lives of memory do you have? Do you have 3 lives? Shin Jiuli looked at her quietly. After a moment, he smiled and said, For lives. Chapter 23:19. Ah! Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. For lifetimes? Which 4 lifetimes? She had only experienced 3 lifetimes with him. Where did the 4th life come from? Shin Jiuli lay down again and answered her lazily, Think about it yourself. When Ning Xuema was about to think about it, there was a sudden explosion of fireworks outside. Shin Jiuli sat up with her in his arms and snuggled with her in front of the window. Come, look at the birthday present I have prepared for you. Flames rose into the sky one after another, exploding in the deep blue sky. Then, they scattered into tens of thousands of flowers that drifted with the wind. Those flowers were as red as the red spider lily, but the outer circle was inlaid with silver edges. Each flower was dazzling and beautiful, falling like rain. The scenery was so dreamy that it almost made people feel like they were in a dream. Ning Xuema opened her eyes wide and murmured, Am I still dreaming? Shen Jiuli's fingers were still intertwined with hers. He did not say anything, but he held her hand tightly and hugged her even tighter. If this was a dream, he would continue to have this dream with her until the end of time. The journey was dreamy, accompanied by the accompaniment of the heavenly music. Finally, the flower car filled with happiness slowly landed in front of the Fantian Palace. The auspicious air in front of the Fantian Palace was steaming, and it was filled with various guests who came to congratulate them. At the moment when the flower car landed, not only were there 2 colored flowers falling to greet them, but there was also a thunderous applause. Ning Xuema was held by Shinjoli as they walked out of the flower car. Then, Ning Xuema finally saw her son. Little Nyenma was wearing a handsome and beautiful bright golden robe today. He was carrying a flower basket in his small hand, and there were 2 groups of children behind him. One group was a group of maidens, and the other group was a group of boys. The maidens were wearing snow-white fairy dresses, and the boys were wearing sky-blue robes. Every child was as beautiful as an angel in a painting. When little Nyenma led them to walk over, they were particularly eye-catching. The flower boys were led by little Nyenma. Little Nyenma was holding a big bouquet of flowers in his hands. The bouquet was made of rare moonflowers. It was as if he was holding a big bouquet of the moon in his hands. There were even star grass as embellishments. It was beautiful beyond words. Little Nyenma handed the bouquet of flowers to Ning Xuema. His eyes were as big as the moon. "Mother, happy marriage and happy birthday." It turned out that this was the gift that little Nyenma prepared for her. It was indeed special. Ning Xuema took the bouquet and looked at her son's fair and tender face. She had the urge to hug him and take a bite. Standing next to little Nyenma was a beautiful little girl. She had a pair of big eyes that were so bright that they looked like they were carved from jade. Whose child was this? She would be a good wife for little Nyenma. Ning Xuema pondered. Shinjoli held her hand and said to her with a smile, "Children and grandchildren will have their own fate. Don't try to match them up." Ning Xuema glanced at him. Was this guy a roundworm in her stomach? He actually guessed what she was thinking about so quickly. All right, she was just thinking about it. She looked up at the Fantion Palace and was moved. The layout of the Fantion Palace had completely changed. Whether it was the gate or the courtyard walls, they had all changed. Although the original style was grand enough, it always gave a cold feeling and lacked the warmth of a home. The current style was a combination of both, and even had a dreamy color. Ning Xuema liked it at first sight. Chapter 23:20. At this moment, the gate of the Fantion Palace was wide open. In order to accommodate the guests, all the restrictions were removed. The people who came to congratulate the wedding could enter and leave freely. Of course, only a part of the entrance was allowed to enter and exit freely. It was the part that led to the main hall of the Fantion Palace. The Divine Lord liked to be quiet and clean, so the other parts of the Fantion Palace were not open to the public. The wedding officially began. The music began to play. Little Nyenma and the little girl who was walking beside him flew together. A pair of snow-white wings even spread out on the back of the little girl. The 2 of them flew forward in the air and sprinkled fragrant petals along the way. The other children followed behind them and sprinkled flowers in the air. It was a beautiful scene. Shinjoli held Ning Xuema's hand as they walked on the road. Their clothes fluttered in the wind. The entire wedding scene was perfect. When the 2 of them walked on the platform that was specially built for the wedding, the atmosphere of the whole scene was pushed to the peak. The Divine Lord and the Great Devil were already at the top of the continent. Naturally, they did not bow to the heavens and the earth like ordinary couples. Shinjoli and Ning Xuema only symbolically bowed to the heavens. They did not kneel but only bowed. Then, the couple bowed to each other. There was nothing wrong with this bow. Ning Xuema followed Shinjoli's path. After symbolically bowing to the heavens and the earth, Ning Xuema straightened up. Suddenly, a line of words appeared in her mind. "I think when you bow to your parents, you can bow to me." Ning Xuema was stunned. She glanced at the corner of the high platform and saw a white stone that was squatting there. At the moment, it was shining with resentment. Ning Xuema was speechless. The high platform was decorated splendidly with many things. She directly ignored this inconspicuous stone just now. Shinjoli naturally also received the resentment of the Heavenly Law Stone, but he was too lazy to care about it and directly ignored it. The Heavenly Law Stone's heart was a little hurt. Suddenly, the white light shone brightly. It almost blinded the eyes of the audience below the stage. Then, in the white light, it flew up with a swoosh and circled above everyone's heads like a small mountain, causing the people below to cry out in alarm. Then, as if it had found the feeling, it flew away proudly with a swoosh. Before it left, Shinjoli and Ning Shuema each had a line of words in their minds. "You will regret this." Ning Shuema. She found it a little funny. The heavenly Tao stone was behaving like a child throwing a tantrum. She transmitted her voice to Shinjoli. Where did it fly to? Should he go and coax it later? After all, it represents the heavenly Tao, and it even allowed you to be reborn. Shinjoli didn't take it to heart. Don't worry about it. It often has this kind of temper. The heavenly Tao stone conveyed the will of the heavenly Tao, and he was the guardian of the heavenly Tao. The two of them were actually equal, so he naturally didn't need to worship it. Besides, this arrogant stone was often angered by him. Usually, it would be fine after 3 to 5 days. The people below the stage looked at each other. No one thought that a stone could grow legs and fly away with a swoosh. Of course, this was just a small episode. Shinjoli didn't take it to heart. The guests were surprised for a while, but they also forgot about it. After the ceremony, it was time to throw the bouquet. According to the saying of the celestial demons continent, whoever caught the bouquet thrown by the bride would be able to find a good partner. Therefore, when Bai Zhe, who was acting as the MC, shouted, "Bride, please throw the bouquet to spread your good fortune." Then the unmarried men and women below rushed to the front of the stage. They all wanted to catch the bouquet and be tainted by the Devil Lord's happiness. Chapter 23-21. The crowd below the stage was bustling with noise and excitement. Ning Shuema glanced down and saw Yi Tianli standing far away from the crowd. His figure looked a little bleak. She was tempted and wanted to throw the bouquet to him, hoping that his red Luan star would move and find the woman he was destined to. She turned around according to the rules, with her back facing the crowd. She took a deep breath and threw the bouquet high up in the air. With her ability, she could naturally throw the bouquet to whoever she wanted. However, there were too many people below the stage and there were too many masters. If she threw the bouquet too low, it was possible that someone would use a spell to intercept the bouquet midway, so she threw it very high. However, it was too high. The bouquet flew directly into the sky and into the clouds. Thousands of pairs of eyes were looking up at the sky. Everyone was ready to catch the bouquet when it fell. Then the crowd waited for a while, but the bouquet did not fall. Ning Shuema was also somewhat puzzled. She couldn't have thrown it too far and ended up in outer space, right? She didn't seem to have used that much strength. At most, she could only fly up into the clouds and land on Yi Tianli's head. Shinjoli's expression changed. He waved his sleeve to the sky and the floating clouds in the sky disappeared instantly. A person appeared in midair. He was dressed in a loose, light purple robe that concealed his figure. A ghost mask covered his face, and he was holding the bouquet of flowers that everyone had been waiting for. Everyone was angry. They were waiting on the ground obediently. They did not expect that there would be someone in the sky who bought a ticket. Ning Shuema's heart skipped a beat. This was the mysterious person who was elusive. He actually appeared here. The mysterious person looked a little innocent. He looked at the bouquet in his hand and then looked at the two people who had just finished bowing on the stage. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm just passing by. I have no intention of snatching this bouquet. May I know who you want to throw this bouquet to? I can throw it to you on your behalf." Ning Shuema was speechless. Naturally, she couldn't say that she wanted to throw the flower to Yi Tianli, so she just vaguely replied, "I'm just throwing it for good luck. It belongs to whoever gets it. Since Your Excellency has received it, it proves that this flower is fated with Your Excellency. Now that this flower is Your Excellency's, you can do whatever you want with it." This was originally just a prize, so it didn't matter who it was given to. I don't know how to move the red Luan star, so I'll just throw it to the person who knows how to move the red Luan star. This humble one will toss it again to see who this flower is truly fated with. After the mysterious man finished speaking, he waved his hand and the bouquet of flowers spun in the air and fell into the crowd. Countless hands in the crowd reached out desperately, but unexpectedly, just as the bouquet was about to fall into the crowd, A sudden gust of wind blew. The gust of wind blew the bouquet in one direction like a whirlwind. Then, with a bang, it hit a person's head. Shen Yanma was standing outside the field to watch the show. He was blinded by the gust of wind and was rubbing his eyes. He did not expect that a flower would fall from the sky and hit his head. He hurriedly grabbed it, but when he saw the bouquet in his hand, he was stunned for a moment. Then he angrily looked at the sky. It was very immoral to throw things from the sky. The mysterious man seemed to have not expected that the flower that he casually threw would hit a little kid. For a moment he was also stunned. When Shen Yanma looked up and stared at him, he was also looking at him. Their eyes met in the air. Chapter 23-22. Shen Yanma suddenly felt that he was being penetrated by the mysterious person's gaze. He could even feel that the mysterious person was looking at him with a very complicated gaze. It was so complicated that he could not understand it. However, this could also be his illusion. After all, the mysterious person was wearing a mask. His facial features were all covered, and his eyes were also behind the mask. Shen Yanma could not see his eyes at all. "I am sorry." The mysterious person finally moved his gaze away and said so casually. He turned around and disappeared. He came quickly and left quickly as well. Initially, everyone wanted to congratulate the lucky man who got the flower. However, they could not bring themselves to congratulate him when they saw the adorable face of little Nyenma. The bride's bouquet could only be exchanged twice. If it was exchanged more than twice, it would lose its auspicious effect. Yi Tianli was not a person who cared about trifles. He waved the fan in his hand and congratulated little Nyenma. "Nyenma, congratulations on receiving this flower. Congratulations on your red Luan star." Little Nyenma looked at the flower in his hand and then looked at Yi Tianli. He was quite puzzled and asked, "What is the red Luan star? Can it help me improve my kung fu?" Yi Tianli was speechless. Ning Xuema looked at her son who was holding the flower. She also felt a deep pain in her stomach. Little Nyenma was only 6 months old. How could he already have a red Luan star? It was too early. Shin Jioli's gaze also fell on his son. His eyes were slightly deep as if he was speculating about something. Ning Xuema seemed to have thought of something. She whispered to Shin Jioli, who was next to her, "What is the meaning of this moonflower?" "Reunion." Shin Jioli spat out 2 words. Ning Xuema was relieved. "The meaning of this flower is good. Aren't we reunited as a family?" Shin Jioli glanced at the direction where the mysterious person went. There was a flash of deep thought in his eyes, but then he smiled and said softly, "You are right. Our family is reunited." The red cloud-like wedding canopy hung down quietly. The wedding room was decorated beautifully and stylishly. Ning Xuema curiously looked at everything in the room. This should be Shin Jioli's former bedroom, but the original bedroom was gone. This bedroom was obviously newly built. Not only was this palace newly built, but all the buildings in the Fantian Palace were also newly built. Although the style had changed greatly, it was still very ingenious. As Ning Xuema walked along the way, she only felt that the layout of every place was very much to her liking. "Guru, why did you change all the buildings in Fantian Palace?" Ning Xuema asked Shin Jioli, who had just finished drinking wine with her. The wine was very strong, and her snow-white face was flushed red because of the alcohol. Shin Jioli looked at her with deep eyes and raised his arms to hold her in his arms. "The original one is dirty and doesn't meet your aesthetic standards." Ning Xuema's heart moved. She naturally understood what Shin Jioli meant by dirty. Luo Jiuchen had lived here for a period of time. Although there were many places he couldn't enter, he still lived in Fantian Palace and even regarded himself as the owner. With Shin Jioli's misophobia, he naturally couldn't tolerate this. He simply destroyed and rebuilt Fantian Palace according to her preferences. With such a husband, what more could a woman ask for? Ning Xuema couldn't help but raise her head and kiss him on the cheek. "Guru, thank you." Before she could finish her sentence, his lips kissed hers. His voice was hoarse but full of temptation. "I don't accept other forms of thanks. Give me a real one." Chapter 23:23. The ambiguous atmosphere in the room gradually increased. In the deep kiss, the corolla on Ning Xuema's head was removed by Shinjioli. Her long hair flowed like water and fell on her gradually bare shoulders. In the midst of an intense and deep kiss, he carried her. When Ning Xuemo regained her senses, she had already landed on the big warm and soft bed. The wedding dress that was so difficult to take off unexpectedly left her body and flew out of the bed curtain in an instant, leaving only a thin set of underwear on her body. Her heart was beating like thunder. Although Ning Xuema had been entangled with him for 3 lifetimes and had rolled in the bed a few times, as Ning Xuema, the chances of rolling in the bed with the great god in this lifetime were pitifully few. Other than that time when they used force, the two of them had never been officially intimate. The few times that Ning Xuema had left a deep impression on her were after she transmigrated and the great god from 50,000 years ago. Those few times were like a dream to her. Only this moment was the most real. Although his kiss was restrained, it was like a violent storm that wanted to completely engulf her. It made it hard for her to breathe. After being tossed around for 3 lives, his skill in this aspect was extremely high. Very quickly, Ning Xuema was completely defeated by his teasing. The blood in her body boiled, and her originally snow-white skin turned a light pink. Her cheeks were flushed red, and her eyes seemed to be watery. Finally, the last piece of cloth was removed from her body. Her black hair was spread out below her, and her sparkling and translucent jade-like body was pressed against the fiery red bedding. White on white, red on red, contrasting with a kind of soul-stirring beauty. Shinjioli took a deep breath. His eyes were as deep as the unfathomable sea. There were waves surging in his eyes, wanting to completely sweep her away. The blood in his body was surging. His blood was like boiling lava that was screaming to erupt. In an instant, it ignited each other's passion. Xuema, his voice was low and hoarse like the waves rolling in from afar. He lifted one of her legs. "Call me husband." Ning Xuema looked at him with her watery eyes. She naturally knew what was waiting for her. Even she herself was looking forward to this moment. After reuniting with him for such a long time, she was also eager to feel each other's true feelings. But she seemed to be a virgin again. Seeing that he was about to bring the storm over, she couldn't help but push his chest with her hand and said in a trembling voice, You have to be gentler." Shinjioli hugged her and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, Xuema, I will give you a wedding night that you will never forget." It was a stormy night. Ning Xuema felt that this was indeed an unforgettable wedding night, but the most unforgettable thing was not how many times they went to the mountains together, but the shock of the next morning. Initially, Shinjioli had been tormenting her until dawn. Before she could fall asleep, she was awakened by the sound of the door being slammed open. Before she could react, the door was slammed open by someone. A small figure rushed in directly. Fortunately, Shinjioli reacted quickly. He wrapped Ning Xuema in his arms tightly with the quilt and put a set of clothes on his body automatically. "Mother, Lord Father." The little one rushed towards the bed curtains. Shinjioli waved his sleeve, and the little one stopped moving. "Father." The little one's face was red, and his eyes were full of confusion. "Get out." Shinjioli spat out 2 words. With another wave of his sleeve, little Nianma was directly teleported out of the bedroom. Chapter 23:24. Shinjioli turned around and patted the blanket that was wrapped around Ning Xuema. "Don't be afraid. Wait for me here. I want to see what is wrong with this boy." He turned around and walked out of the room. Ning Xuema's face was burning under the blanket. Her son had almost seen her parents' private moment. It was strange. The boy usually woke up late. Why did he wake up so early today? She even had tears in her eyes, as if she had been frightened by something. She wanted to put on her clothes and go out to sea, but her body was so sore that she did not even want to move her fingers. He struggled in his blanket for a while, but he didn't manage to get up. He simply lay back down and listened to the movements outside. After a while, she could not help but laugh. It turned out that little Nianma had a nightmare. He actually dreamed that the mysterious man with the ghost face was looking at him from outside his bed. The deep gaze made his hair stand on end. He opened his eyes and found that he was still in his own Qingshao palace. He was the only one in the palace. He remembered the gaze of the mysterious man in the dream and felt a chill in his heart. He could no longer stay calm and ran to his parents' room to seek protection. Shen Jiuli listened to him quietly. He directly took the little boy out and said calmly, "It is just a nightmare. Is it worth making a fuss? If you are a man, you should stay calm." Little Nianma was a little embarrassed by his father's scolding, but he was not convinced. "I am a boy now, not a man. A man should be trained from a young age." Shen Jiuli took him back. "Well, I will be a good man in the future. Father, I am still sleepy." Little Nianma's voice was still full of sleepiness. "Go back to your Qingshao palace if you are sleepy." "But I am scared. I always feel that there is a pair of eyes staring at me." Little Nianma was still afraid. "It is just a psychological effect. Let's go. I will send you back." "No, father. Can you let Nianma sleep with both of you? Nianma does not take up much space. A small bed is enough." Little Nianma still wanted to fight for his rights. "No. You've grown up and can no longer sleep with your parents." Shen Jiuli sternly refused. "But mother has promised me yesterday." Little Nianma was not convinced. "I have the final say in this matter." Shen Jiuli only replied with a few words before he took the boy out. The conversation between the father and son gradually faded away. Ning Xuema couldn't help but rub her forehead. She didn't expect to get married so soon, so she casually agreed to her son's request. Speaking of which, why did his son have nightmares? The Fantian Palace was always shrouded in a divine aura, and there were also 8 divine beasts guarding it. No evil beings could enter, so it shouldn't be the work of any evil beings. Could it be that he was startled by the bouquet of flowers that the mysterious man threw on his head yesterday? It should be. While she was lost in thought, a gentle breeze blew through the hall. Shen Jiuli had returned and appeared directly in the inner hall. He lifted the bed curtain and got on the bed. He directly hugged Ning Xuema in his arms. "Why don't you sleep more?" Ning Xuema shook her head. "I can't sleep." She was still worried about the mysterious man. "Great Master, have you checked the Nianma Palace? Is there anything wrong?" Shen Jiuli shook his head slightly. "There is nothing wrong. There is only Nianma's aura in the palace." Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that the little guy really had an unintentional dream. However, when she thought of the bouquet of flowers, she still felt a little uneasy. The bouquet of flowers that the mysterious man threw just happened to hit her son's head. Could it mean that her son and the mysterious man were fated? Chapter 23-25. Although she had read a few novels and did not look down on the protagonists, she still did not want her son to have any relationship with a man. Who is the mysterious man with the ghost face? Ning Xuema was still very curious. She did not have all the memories of Xuema in her previous life, so she did not know much about the people in this continent. She only occasionally heard about this mysterious man from General Manager Mu. No one really knew the background of this mysterious man. They only knew that he was very powerful and was very mysterious. He was also very low-key and never fought for power. He was really a mysterious man. Because this man did not care about fame and fortune, no one really investigated him. Even General Manager Mu, who was always very well informed, did not find out anything about him. Originally, Ning Xuema did not care about this mysterious man. However, this mysterious man had passed by her twice and scared little Nianma once. This time, she could not ignore it even if she wanted to. Shen Jiuli pondered for a moment and did not care. Don't care who he is. As long as he is harmless to us, it is fine. Ning Xuema was once bitten, twice shy. It is hard to say that he is not malicious to us. I always feel that he is not as simple as he seems. Little Nianma's nightmare is also a little strange. Shen Jiuli kissed her lips. Don't worry. I know what to do. Her lips were like the most delicate petals. Shen Jiuli only wanted to kiss her gently, but he did not expect that he could not let go after the touch. Early in the morning was the time when men were most easily excited. At this moment, he was holding the person he had been thinking about day and night. Even Shinjuli was a little bit unable to control himself. Of course, he did not want to control himself. After a deep kiss, both of them were panting. Ning Xuema's beautiful face was bright red. Her eyes were watery as if there was a pool of autumn water in them. His eyes were also full of water, like the turbulent sea. Xuema, since you're not sleepy yet, let's do something more meaningful. Shinjuli propped himself up and looked down at her. His eyes were filled with surging waves. Ning Xuema wanted to protest, but he sealed her lips with a kiss. The bed curtains were pulled down again, covering the entire room. If Ning Xuema was asked to describe the days after their marriage, she could only describe them with 8 words, sweet, and her waist hurt a little. It wasn't easy for the two of them to be together. Naturally, they were together day and night and couldn't bear to be apart for even a moment. As for little Nianma, who was finally reunited with his family, he was a little miserable. His father probably wanted to make up for the fatherly love that he had missed out on for the past 6 months. His schedule was packed to the brim with training, martial arts, and studying. Aside from sleeping at night, there was no time for him to rest. Little Nianma was about to cry because of his fatherly love. Moreover, when he slept at night, he could no longer get into his mother's arms because there was a new wizardry barrier in his father's bedroom. He could no longer break in directly. Not only could the wizardry barrier prevent him from entering, but it could also block his voice. One night, he was so angry that he simply scratched the door for the whole night. However, there was no movement inside at all. He felt wronged and angry at the same time. He felt that his parents did not love him anymore and allowed him to cry outside. He simply fell asleep outside the door. He wanted to see if his mother would feel sorry for him when she saw him sleeping outside the door the next day. Then, if his mother felt sorry for him, he could openly sleep with his mother at night. His little abacus was crackling and rattling, but... Chapter 23-26. His little abacus crackled loudly, but when he woke up, he found that he was not sleeping outside his parents' bedroom, but on a big rock. The breeze was rather chilly. He sneezed and looked around. Then, he realized that there were a lot of rocks around him. All kinds of big stones were arranged high and low under the moonlight. They looked like giants looking down at him. Where was this? He did not remember that there was such a stone slope in the Fantion Palace. Little Nianma jumped up. He was short, and the stones were too tall. They blocked his view. He looked at the tallest stone not far away and decided to jump on it to have a better look. With his qing gong, it was easy for him to jump on a big stone. However, he did not expect that he would hit a wizardry barrier when he jumped less than 10 feet high. He was bounced back and fell on his butt. Shin Yanma was speechless. He seemed to have suddenly understood something. He clenched his little fists tightly. This must be his father's masterpiece. His father must have heard him scratching the door and crying. He must have thought that he was too noisy. In order to punish him, he locked him in the array. Fortunately, he had seen this array before. In order to train him, his father had taught him how to break the array. He also locked him in several arrays to train him. This array was one of them. Although this array was complicated, since he had broken it once, he could naturally break it a second time. Little Nianma clenched his fists. However, after he broke out of the array this time, he must complain to his mother during lunch. With this thought in mind, little Nianma began to break the array. He was a genius with memory. He would not forget any array that he had broken. He would not make any mistakes. He could break out of this array in less than 2 hours. He looked up at the moon above his head and calculated the time. He estimated that when he broke out of the array, the sky would be slightly brighter. Perhaps he could still make it in time to greet his mother. 2 hours later, Shin Nianma squatted under a stone. He looked around in disbelief. There seemed to be more stones around, and there was even fog in the array. Ning Xuema had practiced kung fu to this level. In fact, she could already abstain from eating, but she liked the feeling of eating together with her family. Therefore, she had to eat a meal every day for the past few days. What's more, those dishes were all prepared by Shinjioli. Every dish was delicious, and she wanted to have a second bite after the first. The Almighty's delicious food was a temptation that she couldn't resist. In the past few days, Shin Yenma, who was exhausted by his homework, would always come to her and have a meal with her. He would always talk about things that interested him. However, this time, the dishes were served neatly, and the aroma of the food lingered in the air, but little Nyenma was still nowhere to be seen. Ning Shuema was puzzled. She asked the Almighty who was sitting beside her, "Where is Nyenma? Why don't I see him today?" Shin Jiuli peeled a prawn for her and put it on her plate. Calmly, he said, "Nyenma is practicing the art of breaking the array. He has forgotten to eat and sleep. I don't think he will come for dinner today." Ning Shuema was pleased. Her son was actually so hardworking. She was also a secret agent. She knew that strict requirements were the only way to train a real talent. Of course, she would not object to her son being so hardworking. She nodded and did not ask any more. However, she still cared about her son. She saved a good fruit for her son. She was going to wait for her son to come out of the array. Chapter 23-27. In fact, 3 days had passed. Ning Shuema had left 3 peaches of immortality for her son, but her son was still nowhere to be seen. She was a little worried, so she asked Shinjioli. Shinjioli was drinking tea. He poured her a cup of tea and then turned the teacup for her to speculate. This time, in order to train his observation and distinguishing ability, I deliberately changed the array that he had been through. Perhaps, he did not notice the subtle difference between the 2 arrays and went to the fork. Ning Shuema was speechless. She drank the tea and asked him curiously, "What do you mean by subtle difference? What is the difference?" Shinjioli thought for a moment and said, "For example, there is a small crack in the hexagonal stone where the eye of the array was, and there is a 2-inch tall grass at the original life gate." Ning Shuema was speechless. She knew about Shinjioli's array. When she was Shinjioli's disciple, he had locked her in there. There were piles of irregular stones, hexagonal stones, octagonal stones, oval stones, and pentagonal stones. All of them were natural stones. The wrinkles on the stones were finer than chrysanthemum petals. It was comparable to the wrinkles on an 80-year-old woman's face. If there was a small crack on the stones, no one would notice it. As for the grass, it was everywhere. If there were hundreds of grass at the life gate, and there was one more, even she would not notice it, let alone Shin Yenma. Poor son. If he relied on his old experience to break through the array, he would be dragged into the ditch. No wonder he could not get out after so long. Yenma was still so young. Was it really good to let him break through such a complicated array? Did the master really want to train his son's ability to break through the array? Or did he think that the boy was a third wheel and sent him away? Is there any food in the array? Ning Shuema was a little worried when she thought of her son who had not eaten for 3 days. Don't worry. In the array, he will be fine even if he does not eat for half a month. Moreover, he has practiced the Inidia technique. It will not be a problem for him to last for a month. Shen Yenma had spent 3 days and 3 nights in this godforsaken stone array. He did not have the fragrant food that his father cooked. There was no mother's warm embrace and caress. He was the only one who stayed in the stone formation, guarding a pile of broken stones and studying them. When he was tired, he would fall asleep on the big stone and continue studying when he woke up. In the past few days, he had cried and rolled on the ground. Since there was no one around, he did not have to worry about his image as the Son of God. But no matter how much he cried or threw a tantrum, it was to no avail. Instead, there were more and more stones around him, and the fog was getting thicker and thicker. He finally understood that the ruse of self-injury was useless against his father. If he wanted to get out, he could only rely on himself. He didn't know why, but he always felt that someone was watching him, but he couldn't find that person even after using his telekinesis for a long time. He rolled his eyes and instantly understood. It must be his father watching him from outside the array. He couldn't give up like this. He had to get out. He couldn't let his father look down on him. Therefore, he wiped his tears, patted his little robe and stood up. He continued to stare bitterly at the pile of broken stones, trying to figure out how to break the formation. In fact, Shenyanma thought too much. His father could not wait to stick to his mother every day, so how could he have the time to visit him? Someone else was looking at him. On the big stone outside the stone formation stood a man in black. His face was covered by a pitch-black ghost mask. Chapter 23-28. He was wearing a black mask with a grimace on it. His pure black robe was embroidered with dark patterns with golden threads, which made him look luxurious and domineering. There was a strange jade pendant hanging on his waist, which shone with unpredictable light under the sunlight. At this moment, he stood still on the big rock and looked at the giant stone array not far away. He also looked at the little kid who was running around in the array. The jade pendant on his waist flashed. The man in black looked at the jade pendant with a complicated expression. Poof! The wizardry barrier was broken, and a little kid with a face like a little cat came out. He stood like a little teapot with his hands on his waist and laughed loudly. Ha! I am out. The kid was Shenyanma. It took him 3 days to finally get out of the stone array. How could he not be happy? Shenyanma was laughing without caring about his image. Suddenly, he felt someone quietly looking at him. He was shocked and immediately looked over. A pitch-black ghostly face, a pitch-black outer robe, and that eternally complicated gaze. It was the person who hit his head with the flower. It was the person who stood in front of his bed and scared him in the middle of the night. It was the person who gave him nightmares for several days. When Shenyanma saw the person, this was the only thought in his mind. He was so scared that he took a step back. However, he stepped on a small stone and slipped, falling back into the array. The man in black was speechless. Shenyanma was speechless. Looking at the familiar crumpled stones around him and looking at the gradually gathering thick fog, Shenyanma wanted to cry but had no tears. He swore that he would never forgive that person. The moon was shining brightly. Shenyanma broke out of the array again. This time, he was not so arrogant. He carefully poked his little head out of the wizardry barrier and looked around. After making sure that the man in black was not around, he was relieved and jumped out boldly. After jumping out, he seemed to be a little worried. He used his telekinesis to check the surroundings again to make sure that there was no aura of the man in black. He then sighed with relief and made a peace sign with his hand. He ran back to the Fantion Palace with a smile. Above the clouds, the black-clothed man stood with his hands behind his back. He looked down at the cautious figure below and heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he flew up to the clouds in time. Otherwise, he would have scared the little kid back to the array. He lowered his head and looked at the shining jade pendant on his waist. The jade pendant was actually engraved with 8 mythological beasts: the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, the black tortoise. The 8 mythological beasts were all facing the center. In the center, there was a sparkling and translucent ball. It was that ball that had been flashing recently. It was not until little Nyenma was far away that the jade returned to its normal color. He simply sat down on the big rock. His hand, which had been hidden in his sleeve, finally stretched out. He took the jade pendant from his waist and held it between his 2 fingers. His fingers looked as if they were carved from jade. The shape of his hand was extremely beautiful, making people want to touch it. That jade was sparkling and translucent, and that hand was white and translucent. Under the contrast of the two, it seemed as if they were both transparent. He looked at the jade for a moment and suddenly sighed softly. He raised his hand as if he was going to rub his eyebrows, but the moment he touched the mask, he stopped. Was it him? Let's observe for a while longer. Little Nyenma was smart enough to realize that as long as he did not stick to his mother at night, his father would be very nice to him. The homework that he assigned during the day was also not too much. Chapter 23-29. Little Nyenma was smart enough to realize that as long as he did not stick to his mother at night, his father would be very kind to him. The homework assigned to him during the day was not too much. and he even had time to swim in the lake for half a day. Even his father's gaze towards him was filled with love and affection. Once he threw a tantrum, he would definitely sleep with his mother, and his father would be unhappy. Of course, his father had always been a man of few words. Even if he was unhappy, he would not show it. He just looked at him with a smile that was not a smile for a long time, and then quietly increased the intensity of the training. If the original amount of practice was the wool of a sheep, then the increased amount of practice was the hair of a fat cow. It was a few times. Little Nyenma could not finish it, so he was thrown into a certain array as a punishment. It was only natural that he would be thrown into a certain array to revise. Little Nyenma had experienced it twice and summed it up. Once, he was so angry that he ran to his mother to complain. He said that his father was using his position to avenge a private grudge by depriving him of the opportunity to enjoy his mother's love. He even shook his mother's sleeve and said that his mother had promised him that she would sleep with him, so she couldn't go back on her words. What his father was doing now was framing his mother. Little Nyenma had read a lot of books, so he could talk a lot. Ning Shuema felt that her son was right. Since she had promised her child, she could not go back on her words. Therefore, that night, she deliberately brought Nyenma to Shinjioli's study to tell him about her son's thoughts. Then she discussed with Shinjioli that she would sleep with her son every other day. Her son was still so young, so he could not be deprived of maternal love. When the child was 1 year old, she would let her son sleep alone. Little Nyenma thought that his mother's suggestion was a good one and also a very normal one. The children in the Celestial Kingdom would only be separated from their mothers after they were 1 year old. Some spoiled children would be separated even later, and even slept together until they were 2 years old. At that time, Shinjioli was helping Ning Shuema to review the documents in Mo Palace in the study room. When he heard what Ning Shuema said, he smiled and looked at Shin Yenma. Shin Yenma felt a chill down his spine as if he was being stared at by a lion. It turned out that Shin Yenma's intuition was very accurate. He only slept comfortably with his mother for 1 night, but the next day, the difficulty of his homework suddenly doubled. Not only that, but his father had also developed a new array formation. Using the excuse of letting him test the array formation, he directly threw him into the array formation and couldn't come out for a few days and nights. Breaking formations was the best way to improve one's abilities. Not only did he have to identify the path of the array, but he also had to fight with the monsters that appeared out of nowhere. The level of the monsters would also increase along with Little Nyenma's power. Little Nyenma's kung fu would improve significantly after he broke the array. Although his mother loved him, she did not spoil him. Perhaps it was because both of them had suffered too much during those days, so his mother also wanted to train him to be a talent. Therefore, she turned a blind eye to the training that his father gave him, as long as he did not lose his life and did not really hurt him. In this way, although Little Nyenma fought for the benefit of letting his mother sleep with him every other day, the opportunity to really enjoy this benefit was very rare. It could be said that it was only once in a while. Little Nyenma sat on a big branch of a big tree and looked up at the moon in the sky. He always felt a little uncomfortable. Chapter 23:30. This time, the array formation was an endless tropical rainforest. The rainforest was full of swamps, and there was no place to stand. There were all kinds of monsters in the rainforest, including crocodiles, poisonous snakes, and lizards. There was also a big poisonous mosquito that gave Little Nyenma a headache. It kept buzzing in his ears, and if he was not careful, it would bite him and leave a few red marks on his tender skin. The weather in the rainforest was very strange. One moment the sun was hot on his head, and the next moment, it was cloudy with heavy rain. This time, the array formation that his father set for him was particularly bad. He could not use any spells in it, and could only rely on his physical strength. Whether it was killing monsters or walking, he had to rely on his real kung fu. Once they had gotten used to using spells, they would no longer pay attention to their physical training. Little Nyenma was a genius in spells, but he was lazy when it came to physical training. After being thrown into the array, Little Nyenma suffered a lot. He was often chased by all kinds of monsters. If he did not pay attention, he would be drenched by the rain. The air in the rainforest was humid. After being wet, without the support of spells, it was difficult for his clothes to dry. Just like now, he was riding on a branch and relying on the wind blowing through the forest to dry his clothes. A breeze blew past, causing him to sneeze. He hugged his arms and felt that the wind was a little gloomy. He looked down again and tapped his temples with his small hand. He had already been trapped in this lousy array for 7 days. However, he still had no clue. When could he get out? Rumble! His stomach was growling again. In this crazy forest, not only could he not use any spells, but even the fasting spell did not work here. He was easily hungry, and he did not have any dry food with him. If he wanted to fill his stomach, he could only rely on himself to hunt. The animals in the forest were more agile than monkeys. It was not easy to hunt, and it took him a long time to hunt one. A pair of small green eyes flashed under the tree. Little Nienma rushed down like a little wolf. A moment later, he caught a small wild boar that was also hungry. Although it was called a small wild boar, it was not small. It was about 50 kilograms. Little Nienma swung his sword and killed the little boar. Wild boar meat wasn't tasty, but the baby boar tasted better. The meat from this wild boar was enough for him to eat for 2 days. His technique was very fast. A moment later, he cut off the good meat from the wild boar and threw the skeleton on the spot to attract other carnivores. He brought the meat to another place. This was the standard way to survive in the wild. There were many carnivores in the forest, including leopards, tigers, wolves, and other large animals. If he didn't dispose of the food he hunted quickly, the smell of blood would attract other carnivores and snatch the fruits of his labor. Therefore, little Nienma finally learned his lesson after a few failures. As long as he could hunt for food, he would run away after slicing the meat and find a safe place to roast it. Not only was hunting difficult, but the most difficult thing was making a fire. The wood here was so damp that water could drip out, and he didn't have any spells to use, so he could only use the most stupid method to make a fire. Little Nienma was hitting the 2 stones with all his might. He used the sparks to ignite the half-dry firewood that he had spent a lot of effort to dry with his internal power. The process was very difficult. Little Nienma was busy for a long time, but he still could not ignite the fire. Instead, he was so hungry that his legs were weak, and his vision was blacked out. No wonder his mother said that survival in the wild was a test of one's ability. It was true. If only the fire could be preserved, I will help you ignite the fire, and you can share half of your meat with me. How about that? Suddenly, a voice came from above little Nienma. Chapter 23:31. Little Nienma raised his head. When he saw who it was, he was so shocked that his fingers trembled. The small flame that he had tried so hard to ignite was extinguished by the man's stone. The man was dressed in black, almost the same color as the night sky. Only the mask on his face was red. It was still the same ghost mask, but this time, the ghost face looked particularly gloomy. It was the mysterious ghost face man. Although he often changed his appearance, little Nienma could still recognize him at a glance. Who was this man? Why did he always appear in his territory? Who are you? Why do you keep following me? Nienma took a step back and looked at the man with vigilance. These days, he often felt that someone was watching him in the dark. Now, it seemed that it was not an illusion. The man folded his arms and only said 2 words, "I am just passing by." Passing by? Who was he kidding? He came to the Fantion Palace and was just passing by? Strange, how did this man enter the Fantion Palace? The prohibition of the Fantion Palace had been activated. Without the guidance of the family of 3, outsiders could not enter at all. How did this ghost face man come in? Could it be that his parents invited him to pass by? Since it was not invited, there was only one possibility. This man sneaked into the Fantion Palace. In this world, there was only one person who could sneak into the Fantion Palace, and that was Luo Jiuchen. Was this man Luo Jiuchen? Did he not die and came to the Fantion Palace to seek revenge? At this moment, many speculations flashed through little Nienma's mind. The man did not seem to notice little Nyenma's increasing vigilance. He took out a piece of wood that looked like a big mushroom and waved it in front of little Nyenma. This is the fire wood. It is good at preserving the fire. If you have it, you don't have to break stones to start a fire. While he was talking, the man blew at the wood, and a flame came out of the wood. This was really a good thing. Little Nyenma thought about it and decided to make an exchange with the mysterious man. A moment later, a fire was finally built. Little Nyenma gave half of the wild boar meat to the man and let him roast it himself. The man did not seem to have any intention to cook the meat. Instead, he kept the meat and sat on a branch nearby to watch little Nyenma roast the meat. Little Nyenma had just finished grilling a skewer. He brought it to his nose and smelled it. His culinary skills were good, and the barbecued meat was fragrant. He breathed a sigh of relief and closed his eyes. When he was about to take a bite to soothe his empty stomach, he did not expect to bite on a branch. The dry and hard branch almost pricked his little mouth. He opened his eyes, and then he realized that all the flesh on his branch had disappeared. Only an empty branch was left in his hand. Little Nyenma remained silent. He immediately looked at the mysterious man, only to find him sitting sideways on a tree branch, his black robe hanging down like tassels. The skewers of meat that he had roasted flew diagonally above the mysterious man as if they had grown legs. Piece by piece, they fell towards the mysterious man's mouth. The mask on the mysterious man's face had been taken off, but it still covered his face so that little Nyenma could not see his face. All he could see was the meat that he had grilled disappearing. Little Nyenma was furious and rushed to the mysterious man. "Give me back my meat." He had already given half of it to the mysterious man, but he still wanted to snatch it from him. The mysterious man did not move, but his body moved like a stream of water and moved to another branch. Little Nyenma missed. Chapter 23:32. You didn't keep your promise. Little Nyenma glared at the mysterious man and wanted to kick him away. "I only promised to give you the fire seed in exchange for half of your meat. I didn't say that I can't take the meat away from you." The man answered casually, "You can take it back if you want." "Take it back?" Nonsense. That skewer of meat had already entered his stomach, so he couldn't kick it out again, right? Little Nyenma looked at the man angrily for a long time. Then his stomach growled again. "You can still roast it again." The man kindly suggested. "You can't take it anymore." Little Nyenma warned. The man seemed to smile and looked at little Nyenma with a sharp gaze. "You can think of a way to prevent me from taking your meat." Little Nyenma was speechless. The man's kung fu was not ordinary. It could be described as unfathomable. Little Nyenma's kung fu could not be compared to his. He could probably kill him with just a little finger. In this array, little Nyenma could not even find a helper. It seemed that there was no other way to deal with such a strong man except to surrender. Little Nyenma's face turned pale and red. Finally, he gave in. "How about this? I will roast 2 portions each time. One for you and the other for me. How about that? If you don't agree, then I will not roast it. Neither of us can eat it." The man seemed to be moved. He nodded slightly and finally agreed. Therefore, little Nyenma began to roast the meat again. He roasted 2 skewers in one go. After roasting, he gave one to the mysterious man. The man looked at the skewer in his hand and said, "I want yours." Little Nyenma was too lazy to argue with him and gave his skewer to him. Just like that, little Nyenma roasted the meat 4 or 5 times in a row. Each time, he let the mysterious man choose whatever he wanted. The man did not hesitate and chose the biggest one each time. Little Nyenma was finally full, but there was not much left of the wild boar meat in his body after that. After he was full, he patted his little robe and stood up. The man sat on the tree and looked at him. "I have eaten so much of your meat. Logically speaking, I can help you a little. What do you need me to help you with?" Little Nyenma glanced at him and shook his head. "No need." That person was a little surprised and continued to tempt him. "I might be able to help you find the array to break the array." Little Nyenma shook his head again. "No. Let's go our separate ways." He even waved his hand at that person to say goodbye. Then he turned around and strode away. A moment later, his small figure had already disappeared into the dense forest. That person sat there and looked at the place where his figure disappeared. He muttered to himself for a moment, then his figure rose, as if he was about to leap onto the treetops. However, he suddenly staggered and almost fell down from the tree branch. He placed his hand on his stomach, where he suddenly felt a burning pain. He was poisoned. He was poisoned. He slowly sat down with disbelief in his eyes. Needless to say, this poison was placed by the little fellow. The question was, when had he drugged him? It was obvious that he had chosen the roasted meat on the spot every time. Could it be that the little fellow had drugged every skewer of meat? Did he just take the antidote in advance? He briefly sensed his body and his fingers tightened. The poison in his body was very strong. It was a strange poison that he had never seen before. In just a moment, he could already feel that the toxicity of the poison had begun to rush crazily in his blood. If he did not find a way to cure it, he was afraid that his vitality would be damaged. Chapter 23:33. He meditated on the spot and began to exercise to expel the poison. With his kung fu, no matter how powerful the poison was, it was easy for him to expel it. He concentrated on expelling the poison. Halfway through, he suddenly sensed something and opened his eyes. He did not see anything unusual. The trees around him were tall and small, and there was a faint fragrance in the air that made one's mind ripple. No. The fragrance was strange. It was poisonous. It seemed that the little guy was determined to kill him. He was trying to poison him with all kinds of tricks. He only took a few pieces of meat from the little guy. Why would he risk his life for this? The little guy was ruthless enough. The mysterious man did not know whether to laugh or cry. He held the jade pendant in his hand and flicked it. He flicked it with his finger and said in a doubtful tone, "You didn't get the wrong person, did you?" Of course, the jade pendant would not answer him. He did not dare to stay there for too long. He endured the pain in his stomach and disappeared from the spot. A moment later, little Nyenma's small figure appeared from behind a big tree. He looked at the direction where the man disappeared and pursed his lips with a proud smile. His mother was an expert in poisoning. Naturally, she passed on her poison skills to her son. Therefore, little Nyenma's poison skills were superb. Few people could compare with him. Because he was often thrown into the wizardry barrier by his father, and there were all kinds of monsters in the wizardry barrier, little Nyenma had a habit of carrying some poison with him just in case. He did not expect to use it this time. He did put the poison in the meat, but not in all the skewers. He only put it in one of the skewers after he understood the man's pattern of picking the meat skewers. The man picked it. Of course, he still brought the antidote with him just in case. The poison he put in was enough to kill an elephant. Moreover, the poison had a special characteristic. It would only be effective when it was activated. When little Nyenma waved goodbye before he left, it was actually a way to activate the poison. That was the only way he could have a chance to escape in time. Little Nyenma's mind was still very meticulous. Even the mysterious man would not be able to escape from his trap. However, the man's kung fu was too high. He did not fall under such a strong poison. Therefore, little Nyenma released a second type of poison in the air. He did not expect that before the poisonous air drifted to the mysterious man, the man noticed it and ran away in time. What a pity! The man was too fast. Even if little Nyenma wanted to catch up with him and give him another stab, he could not. Forget it, in any case, he had forced this person to retreat. It was more important for him to quickly find a way out. When he got out of here, he would report to his father and have him investigate this person's background. If only it wasn't Luo Jiuchen's resurrection, little Nyenma began to look for a way out again. He had been trapped here for 7 days, and he had almost figured out the layout of the rainforest. As long as he continued to calculate, he should be able to find a way out. He sat in a clearing and wrote and drew pictures with a twig. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something. He raised his head and looked around, but he didn't find anything. Frowning, he faintly felt that there was a pair of eyes watching him from the dark. Could it be that the mysterious man had returned? Little Nyenma stood up and was about to search the place. Suddenly, he heard a gust of wind beside him. He subconsciously moved forward and dodged to the side to avoid the sudden attack from behind. Only then did he turn around to take a look, and abruptly took a step back. Not far from him, a huge black python appeared. Chapter 23:34. Divine Master, is Nyenma okay in the array? Ning Xuema looked up at the array that Shinjioli had set up and was worried. Shinjioli had been holding her waist. He looked up at the array and shook his head slightly. He is fine. But he has been trapped in there for 7 days. I am worried that he will be hungry. There is enough food in there. He will not be hungry as long as he is careful. Shinjioli did not care. Although there were many beasts in the array, they could not really hurt people. Once little Nyenma's life was threatened, the beasts would automatically disappear. Therefore, little Nyenma should be safe in there. That was the only way to train his self-protection ability. Shinjioli hugged her and walked away. Didn't you want to go out with me? Let's go. Ning Xuema was still worried. Are we going to leave the child alone here? He will cry if he can't find us. Shinjioli squinted his eyes and looked at the array again. He then shook his head. Don't worry. He will have to stay in there for 3 or 4 days. We will be back in 3 or 4 days. But, Xuema, a loving mother will spoil her son. Shinjioli smiled and rubbed her hair. Don't worry. He will be fine. Ning Xuema thought about it and felt that she was worrying too much. The Fantian Palace was now their territory. Even a fly could not enter without their permission. Even if little Nyenma was trapped in the array, he would be fine. She sighed. After all, he is still young. Shinjioli did not think much of it. He is now 10 months old. When I was his age, I could already take charge and be famous in the 6 realms. That was true. The Divine Master seemed to have become the master of heaven and earth when he was 1 year old. Ning Xuema suddenly had a thought. When little Nyenma was 3 months old, he looked like a 3 or 4-year-old baby. Now that he was 10 months old, he still looked like a 3 or 4-year-old baby. It seemed that he did not grow at all. He wouldn't grow abnormally slowly like her when she was young, right? However, when she was 10 months old, she looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. Was little Nyenma's growth slower than hers? Ning Xuema voiced her concerns. Shinjioli's eyes flashed slightly and he touched her head. Don't worry, when he should grow up, he will naturally grow up. Ning Xuema, what did he mean by it was time to grow up? Perhaps her Nyenma was like an ordinary child who grew up according to the rules of a normal person? After all, she was still an ordinary human when she was pregnant with Nyenma. It did not seem right. Little Nyenma could run and jump as soon as he was born, just like Neza. However, it hasn't been growing for some reason recently. Forget it. As long as the child could grow up normally, it would be fine. She did not have to ask for too much. Besides, although Nyenma's height was like that of a 3 or 4-year-old, his intelligence was far beyond his peers. He had even cultivated to such a high level of kung fu. Thinking of this, she put the question aside and let Shinjioli walk with her. When she was about to leave, she looked back at the array that was suspended in midair. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and pulled Shinjioli's sleeve. Divine Master, I always feel that there are outsiders in our Fantian Palace. Do you have the same feeling? Shinjioli glanced at the array, and his eyes were faintly complicated. Those who can come in are not outsiders. Ning Xuema looked up at him. Chapter 23:35. Shinjioli looked at her big clear eyes and could not help but kiss her forehead. He slowly changed the topic. Xuema, I remember you said that you wanted to go to the Monster Kingdom. Ning Xuema finally remembered the important matter. She hugged Shinjioli's arm. You're right. Let's go to the Monster Kingdom now. Aren't you afraid that you will leave your son alone at home? Shinjioli was very satisfied with her action. He took the opportunity to hug her waist again. Aren't there 8 mythological beasts guarding here? Even if little Nianma comes out, he will not be too lonely. Well, let's go. Without any explanation, she pulled Shinjioli and flew straight away. Shinjioli chuckled in his heart. Even without the 8 mythological beasts, his son would not be lonely. The wheel of fate that belonged to little Nianma had begun to turn. It all depended on when the kid would awaken. The sky in the monster kingdom was always covered with dark clouds. From time to time, it would rain heavily. When Ning Shuema and Shinjioli arrived, there was not a single raindrop in the sky. However, after a few miles, the rain poured like a torrential downpour. Since both of them had practiced kung fu to such a level, they were naturally not afraid of heavy rain. Ning Shuema floated on the ground. The curtain of rain split behind her, and not a single drop fell on her body. She could not help but turn in a circle. Her red dress spread out in the wind like a flaming red butterfly. An umbrella appeared on top of her head. Shinjioli hugged her slender waist. You don't have to use spells. Sometimes, it is not bad to taste the normal rain in the world. To her, his embrace was always the warmest. Ning Shuema comfortably snuggled into his embrace. You're right. The two of them snuggled up against each other, sharing the same umbrella as they walked forward. The raindrops fell all around. Only under the umbrella was the peace and warmth. Ning Shuema snuggled in his arms and felt that he was quietly taking care of her. The umbrella in his hand was slightly tilted to her so that she would not be touched by the rain. The warmth came unexpectedly. It turned out that happiness was so simple. Even walking in the rain with your sweetheart could fill your heart with happiness. She had been married to him for 3 months, and it could be said that the two of them were inseparable. For the first month, she stayed in the Fantion Palace with him. He handled the official documents of the Fantion Palace for her while she sat beside him, eating melon seeds and reading books. The books in this era were naturally not as complicated as the books in the modern era, nor were they as melodramatic and interesting as the novels in the modern era. Most of them were plays between scholars and beauties. Generally, Ning Shuema would doze off and fall asleep after reading them. And every time she woke up, she would be in his arms. He was half hugging her, and that warm embrace made her sleep exceptionally comfortable. In the next 2 months, Shinjioli often took her out to travel the 6 realms. The two of them climbed mountains together, swam across the sea together, and walked around the world together as ordinary people. His days were rather carefree. In these 3 months, some changes had quietly occurred in the 6 realms. The celestial ruler of the celestial world had disappeared for a long time and did not appear again. Some fortune-tellers said that the celestial ruler was most likely dead. The celestial world could not be without a leader, so a new celestial ruler had to be appointed. With the secret help of Ning Shuema and Shinjioli, the candidate for the new celestial ruler fell on Yi Tianli's head. As for the emperor of the mortal world, the golden throne was also changed. The original emperor of the mortal world became the retired emperor with no real power and retired to enjoy the rest of his life. Only the demon world had been in chaos since Shui Ilan's death. Chapter 2336. Mo Palace's general manager Himu often sent letters up, saying that the demon world was starting to fight for the throne again. He begged Devil Master to appoint a king for the demon world to change the chaotic situation of the demon world. Ning Shuema didn't comment and only told them to wait. This wait had lasted until now. Ning Shuema raised her head to look at Shinjioli. His complexion was very good, and he looked like he had completely recovered. Maybe she could beg him to do something, but would he agree? After all, he had a knot in his heart towards that person. Shinjioli suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at her. Shuema, do you have something to say to me? Ning Shuema paused for a moment and finally nodded. Great God, I want to ask you for a favor. What is it? Look at how chaotic the demon world is now, fighting here and there. It's not good. Shinjioli's gaze moved, and he said with a smile that wasn't a smile, so? Ning Shuema sighed. So it's time to appoint a king for the demon world. Furthermore, it has to be a king that can suppress the demon world with one move. It's best if this person is very experienced. Shinjioli was still indifferent. In that case, who does Shuema think is more suitable? Ning Shuema raised her eyes to look at Shinjioli and said sincerely, Great God, I feel that Shui Ilan is very experienced in being a demon king and is very suitable. Shinjioli's gaze turned to her face. Isn't Shui Ilan's soul already scattered? Ning Shuema took in a light breath and looked at him with hope. Great God has a way to revive him, right? Back then, Mother Earth had said that only a god could revive Shui Ilan. Now that the god had returned, Shui Ilan should be saved, right? Although she didn't have any feelings for Shui Ilan, he had died for her. How could she bear to let his soul dissipate? Shinjioli looked at her for a moment. Ning Shuema knew that he had a knot in his heart about Shui Ilan. She was afraid that he would not agree, so she hugged his arm and explained, Guru, I know you have a knot in your heart about Shui Ilan, but he died for you, didn't he? Shinjioli cut her off. The Almighty was so smart. Ning Shuema nodded. He died too tragically. Every time I think about it, I feel that I have let him down. Shinjioli looked at her and slowly opened his mouth. Shuema, if there was a woman who once stood between you and me, and she let you down but saved my life, if she died to save me and only you have the ability to save her, would you save her? Ning Shuema. Did she have the magnanimity to do so? She thought of Luzin. Luzin had indeed harmed her and even formed a huge obstacle between her and Shinjioli. However, Luzin had indeed treated Shinjioli well and saved his life. If Luzin died to save Shinjioli and Shinjioli begged her to save her, would she have a knot in her heart? Would she make a move? Probably not, right? The situation had been reversed. Now that she had asked Shinjioli to save Shui Ilan, Shinjioli would probably be unwilling to do so. To Shinjioli, it was true that Shinjioli had forced him to do this. Don't impose on others what you don't want done to you. She looked at Shinjioli's eyes that were gradually dimming. She forced a smile. If that's the case, then, just as she was about to say, then forget it, Shinjioli cut her off. I will save him. Ning Shuema's eyes immediately lit up. She looked at him with sparkling eyes. Shuema, other than me, I don't want you to owe anyone. Ning Shuema's heart was filled with warmth. The Almighty had really thought of everything for her. Chapter 23:37. Ning Shuema's heart warmed slightly. The great deity really thought of everything for her. He was afraid that she would have a knot in her heart. Even if she hated that person, he would still save them. She really liked the great deity who had such noble character and unquestionable integrity. She couldn't help but kiss him on the lips. Thank you, Almighty. Shinjioli hugged her tightly and deepened the kiss. Shuema, I've told you before that you don't have to be polite with me. The rainstorm hit the umbrella and made a crackling sound. Under the umbrella, the two of them were completely lost in their kiss. So what if the storm was heavy? As long as the two of them could be together, they could face the storm together. Ning Shuema was grateful to the Almighty, so she was particularly engrossed in the kiss. Shinjioli hugged his passionate wife with a smile in his eyes. If one owed someone, they would remember that person forever. He didn't want his wife to think about another man forever. The two of them were newlyweds, so such a passionate kiss could easily ignite a certain passion. His hands began to move around her body restlessly. When Ning Shuema realized it, her belt had already been untied by him. God, they were in the wild. Small monsters could pass by at any time. Ning Shuema hurriedly grabbed his messy hand. Don't do it here. After she finished speaking, she suddenly felt that something was wrong. She turned her eyes to look and discovered that they were already inside a milky white barrier. Shinjioli pushed her down on a soft blanket. If you want to thank me, use this. I won't accept anything else. Having a man who could set up a wizardry barrier and build a love nest at will was really too shameless. She panted and resisted him. You haven't put it into action yet? Wasn't it too early to ask for compensation? Shinjioli easily removed her resistance and pinned her down. Aren't we putting it into action? He asked. Ning Shuema was speechless. He deliberately misunderstood her. The dark underground, the swaying forest of thorns, Everything seemed to have happened yesterday. That day, Shuilan was dragged into the ground here. Not even a bone was left behind. Ning Xuema stood on the shore, slightly lost in thought. She had been to this place before and had tried to summon Shuilan's soul using the soul summoning technique, but to no avail. Now, her only hope was Shinjioli. When she came here that day, she was all alone and her heart was filled with despair. Now, Shinjioli was by her side. Although it was still a dark place, her heart was filled with warmth. Shuema, his soul has been scattered. Even if I manage to gather his soul with my divine power, he may not be in perfect condition. He may not be able to remember what happened in the past. Shinjioli said bluntly. Ning Xuemo nodded. I understand. She only wanted Shuilan to be resurrected. It was a good thing that he could not remember what happened in the past. She hoped that he could have a life that belonged to him, a love that truly belonged to him. Shinjioli glanced at Ning Xuema and knew what she was thinking from her expression. He was relieved. He knew that Ning Xuema did not have any feelings for Shuilan. However, if Shuilan was resurrected and still had his memories, it would not be a good thing for either of them. So, Shinjioli began to cast the spell. 2 hours later, a faint red soul condensed at the tip of his finger. One could barely make out the appearance of the soul when it was alive. At this moment, its eyes were closed and it swayed at the tip of his finger, as if it would dissipate at any moment. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.